Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Guest today is Sean Robinson. Sean, thanks for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jason. This is going to be great.
So, Sean, I'm starting with a softball question.
Yep.
This, I think, should be a softball question. What do you do for fun?
Oh gosh. So this has changed a lot over the course of my life. Right now, I'm doing a lot of rock climbing. Actually, someone who's a good friend now was my PM at a company where I was the head of data science. Is an avid rock climber and fairly fairly old for a PM. He does a great job, and he sort of suckered me into it at one point. Just come on, just come a few times. And I went with him, and I had done bouldering before, and I had done impromptu climbing of, like, scrambles and things you do in the outdoors, but I hadn't really done like proper sport high wall stuff. And I got on a wall, and he was belaying me, and I got about halfway up, and I went, "Oh, now I get it," because I looked down, and I realized that my awareness had just shrunk to a point because my whatever limbic system told me I was gonna fall and die. And I was like, this is like fighting. This is like heavy sparring in the ring or whatever, which is another thing from my background. And I went, oh, it's a turn off switch. It turns everything else off, and it just brings you into the moment. And I was hooked from that moment on. I've been doing rock climbing in that way since maybe a year and a half now.
And do you also do outdoor climbing and anything like ice climbing in the mountains, things like that?
I haven't done proper outdoor like sport or trad climbing yet, and part of that is just my own concern for holding up the group. The guy in question is really good, and a bunch of folks over at the gym that I climb with are really good, and they go outside, and I'm concerned that I'll be like, the anchor that holds everyone back. So I think maybe, another half a year, maybe this season if I get ambitious.
And how long have you been doing this?
Like a year and a half, but I did, aspects of this before. I mean, I was a gymnast at a young age, for a while, and did parkour for a while. And so climbing wasn't foreign, but it felt like a different dialect of the same language. So I was kind of still not good, and I'm still not good. Specific like vertical wall climbing is its own beast. But it's worth trying, and especially if you like kind of physical outdoorsy type of stuff, I don't know, it's a good time.
I could be wrong, but if you did parkour, outdoor rock climbing should be a piece of cake to you because parkour, don't you like jump off buildings and slam the walls and do flips and stuff?
Well, okay, I was never quite that good. The thing is, the stuff you see online is actually absolutely the peak of that sport, and often it's sort of arranged. Um, but sort of, normally I don't think I'd be willing to jump from a building to another where like the consequence was definite death.
Unless they're like this close together, right?
Unless they were real close. If you could chimney it, I would do it. And I definitely chimney up a lot of stuff. But yeah, but no, it's surprisingly different. The sort of it's a different dynamism. With a lot of parkour stuff, you'd like, well, I'm gonna go for that wall, and I'm gonna vault it, and I'm gonna vault the next thing, and the next thing I'll get on top, and then I'm gonna jump off of it. And the idea is this sort of flow where nothing slows you down. Whereas rock climbing, it's very meticulous, or at least it is for me. The idea is still flow,
It
but
has
it's
to
like
be pretty precise, right? I mean, because one
yeah,
small mistake, it's like you're costing people lives, maybe if you're out doing outdoors, right?
yeah, you have to, well, how to put it? Modern equipment is really good, and modern practices are really good. So I think at this point, I wouldn't be concerned going out with a bunch of climbers who've done this before, that like really my safety would be on the line necessarily. But it's still quite difficult. I don't know. There's a bunch of that stuff where like climbing still is to get the flow, but yeah, there are things that I didn't realize on the way in that I hadn't done in gymnastics or parkour or any of that other stuff. One is, and this is if you put on climbing shoes before, they're like really tight, and there's sort of this rubber wrap around your foot. And a lot of that, well, a lot of it's just friction, but a lot of that is designed for you to be able to basically stand on one toe, specifically your big toe. There's a lot of this where, as things get harder, the footholds get smaller, and at some point it's like literally it's like half the size of a toe, and you basically need to cram your big toe, and nothing else really fits on it, on there, and then put your whole weight there while you essentially try and hug the wall and go up higher. Anyway, so it's interesting because I didn't see that coming. And when I all of my normal reflexes were wrong. I wanted to essentially like put a heel or a side of a foot or the side of the ball of the foot on these things. And that worked for the easy stuff. And then as stuff gets harder and like holds get sparser and smaller, the only thing you can really do is sort of the traditional climbing technique, which is much more like toe focused. Anyway, so it's interesting because it felt to me like there was a lot of cross training, and there was, but then the higher levels of stuff really required their own thing. And I say higher levels like I'm good. I'm still not good. I don't know if you're familiar with the grades, but I'll do like a 5.9 all day and like maybe a 5.10 on a good day. So, eh, neither horrible nor good in any way.
Yeah. So you said about a lot of the parkour stage. So I follow like a lot of different people on TikTok, right? One person I follow is actually a parkour person. Parkour, how you say it. She's a female and she always posts videos of doing stuff right. And someone put a comment video like, man, you're such a great person doing this so natural. She said, well, actually, let me tell you the truth. She did a background video of one of her parkour things.
Mhm.
She did like she scaled like 3 or 4 different buildings, right? But she actually found like 6, 7 times, Of course, they cut it out, because it's like rainy and slippery, So a lot of this stage, I think,
Yeah, no, that's yeah, and there's a lot of that stuff in there. I used to say that this was a joke, but I used to say that skateboarding wasn't real. Um, Now I've seen otherwise, but for a while, my entire data set was you would go online and there would be skateboarding videos of people doing these amazing tricks, and there would be competitions where people, at least in the cut together portions, were doing these amazing, sequences of tricks. And then you would go to the park, and in the park, no one had ever landed a trick. And I watched, I think, a cumulative, like every time for a while, it became a thing. I was trying to prove this. I would go to, like, every time I'd walk by a park, or when I was in grad school, there were a bunch of people doing this on stairs and stuff, and see and watch people try to do tricks and fail. And I watched like 150 attempts with not a single success. So I kept on saying, like, statistically, skateboarding isn't real. Anyway, it is real. I've seen people in real life land stuff, but it's so much harder than they make it look.
Yeah, and that's why people like Tony Hawk and Rob, the other guy, the top 1% make all those millions of dollars.
Yeah, the ability to make that consistent has got to be, it's nuts. I mean, just
Yeah.
it's
My thing is like when you fall, like you fall on cement, you fall on some kind of rail, it's like that has to hurt. Like I don't care how much padding you have on, like yeah, that has to hurt.
yeah, I don't the whatever I would call them ukemi, the break fall type
Mm.
stuff off of that is so hard. Um, it's weird because some of the, like, occasionally, uh, climbing and parkour, the break falls are at least obvious. It's like you jump for a thing, you missed a thing, so now your feet are going to hit and slide down the thing. So the next thing to do is like put your hands on it and then try and mantle back up onto the thing. And that's obvious, but like if you're skateboarding and now you're falling towards a rail, but you're also stuck on a plank, that's then going a direction you don't know
That's
which.
not a good place to be at.
Like, I have no idea what the praxis of controlled falls even looks like. I think you have on robust pads and you do your best, but I got to ask someone who's good at skateboarding
I'd be
what the
interested.
break falls
I'd be
look
interested
like.
to see this. No, those are always these stats like football players getting hurt. Like I would see the stats of skateboarders, like what percentage of skateboarders have broken ankles, concussions. I want to see anything like that out there. Maybe that is.
I'm
And
curious.
of course, X Games 6 is a whole different level, right? Like the stuff they do is like that's insane.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm shocked at anyone who can take any one of these like highly specific things and do it at a professional level. And by professional, I mean either competition or sort of to the point where it's entertainment and inspiration for others. Like I I've worked with another good data scientist who was and is an avid downhill mountain biker, like serious guy. He's like doing this every weekend that he can. Um, and he said he tried skateboarding and skateboarding tricks, and they're like impossible. I'm like, but you've been like falling off of mountains on a bike at, like who knows how fast over rocks and haven't broken a collarbone and you're fine. And this happens every weekend and you get on a skateboard, you still can't do it. Anyway, I don't know. If anybody out there is a good skateboarder, huge respect to you for having made that work.
So when you first started rock climbing a year and a half ago, did you have like get yourself in shape? Like, do you have like do
Um,
work like you had like work out first and get in shape to do it, or you just jumped into it, or
it felt like its own thing. I mean, the gentleman who got me into it basically said he was 30 pounds heavier than he wanted to be and not as strong as he wanted to be, and his health was so. And then climbing alone basically did it for him. It was just, but he does it 3 times a week and just said, this is, this is a lifelong thing now. did it for me. It's all that I need, basically. I feel like I'm much more of a cross-training person, um, but it was more inspiration to work on myself, and it's still very much a work in progress. I mean, it's still, probably 20 up from where I'd really like to be, but um, so it can be its own thing. Um, I don't know. Take that as you will. I guess you go either way.
So next, let's talk about live action role play or LARP.
Oh yeah.
How do you get involved with that? So when I first saw LARP on the bio, I didn't know what it is. I look it up and I saw I know what it was. Right. So when I see it, I just think like medieval, like Civil War reenactments, medieval thing. But it's actually like a lot of it's like Comic-Con stuff. Like it could be pretty much anything. Where you can have a Star Wars battle, just role playing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, no, this is a fascinating world to me, even being part of it. So, I like to think if I could consider Dungeons and Dragons or Comic Con or whatever as like a gateway drug, that there are harder like things beyond that nerd curtain, and LARP is one of them. That
You said that
yeah,
you said that nerd award, not me.
the nerd curtain is yeah, it's um, but LARP is basically a catch-all term, although I have to be careful saying that because everybody wouldn't agree with me. So, like from the from the widest view, there are a bunch of different groups who sort of care about a bunch of different things. So there's like the society, the SCA, who people have probably heard of, the Society for Creative Anachronism, are semi-historical. Oh, people might be mad at me for saying semi there because some people take it very seriously. So you everywhere from people who like the idea of knights and want to have armor and participate in a tournament and have fun, all the way through to people who specifically know about like 16th century French garb and the court then, and really want to be, like enacting and highly knowledgeable about those. People who essentially have done an impromptu like PhD level thing and dissertation on it. And all of those people sort of live in the same set of events. Um, I think that's that, and medieval reenactors, who I think the SCA sort of counts as, um, are very much kind of in the hardcore realism camp, mostly, and then it gets essentially then if you the middle of the road tends to be what I think of as like swords and sorcery LARP. So these are the people that you think of as like throwing lightning bolts at each other and having foam swords and like maybe fake armor, and magic exists, and there might be dragons or there might not, or it might not be medieval at all. It might be, near future cyberpunk or after an apocalypse or whatever people have sort of thought up. And this is like what happens if you do tabletop role playing and then you like it so much that you think, well, why don't we just go and like act this out? This, I think, I have a theory about when people started to do this, and I'm probably wrong. But this happened to me once when I was in graduate school. So we were playing a campaign. The guy I knew, also in graduate school, was sort of storytelling, and it was a White Wolf campaign. Which, if you're familiar with those, are the ones that have Vampire the Masquerade, um, all of the other characters. They have a werewolf game and so forth. So we're playing a vampire game, and it was on the edge of being acted out. If somebody had to go off and do some kind of scene, this person would take that person out of the room and do the scene just with them individually. So they had to come back and explain to everyone else what had happened. So everyone was kind of really seeing a different world. People started to wear like bits of maybe costuming and act things out a little bit. And it just felt like, oh, the more we do this, the more real it feels, and like the better it feels. So there's a bunch of that stuff. Under Red Square, I think this game has died. There was a Vampire the Masquerade and White Wolf LARP that happened for, I want to say, like 20 years. And I was in it from in my grad school era. So like 1999 through 2003 or four. And and that's maybe I want to say the lightest and fluffiest LARP, but there's no contact in it, and it is entirely magical. You're pretending to basically be vampires as envisioned by White Wolf, as sort of swiped from various vampire, materials. So anyway, so that's kind of it. You have people that are super hardcore at one end that just, I care about history. I want to know what sort of food people ate in the Renaissance, and we want to do that. All the way over to like, look, I want to play. I want to be like a werewolf and have my werewolf pack, and we're gonna act out doing cool werewolf things. And reality doesn't really matter, and we have the set of rules, but it's just sort of It's just sort of there to hang the game on. Um, that might have been too long-winded. I don't know, but that's kind of the world. And the centroid of my experience is kind of the middle group. So yeah, getting into that was a matter of playing a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons, then finding that LARP existed, and kind of getting dragged into that vampire one I talked about. Um, and now I'm involved in a few of them. Some friends that I know have a sort of LARP site that they purchased, which is a big piece of land down near Centralia, that they have them all at. And yeah, so it's nowadays I tend to be NPCs more than anything, because you still have to have a story, which means someone has to go and act on the players. So there needs to be someone who's, an aggrieved townsperson one minute and then leaves and comes back and is a goblin, and then leaves and comes back and is like part of a dragon. And so I do all of that. That's the sort of latest thing.
So have you always just been a participant, or have you ever been part of the team that put all the event together?
So I think the closest that I've been is that last, that people still need people who are not explicitly players, but who are playing roles that help the world go. That's kind of where I am now. I thought and have had some overtures to like go and be more storytelling and on the team, but it is a tremendous amount of work, and I've never really thought that I had enough time to devote to it outside of my other things. I mean, this is I know people who work this basically like a second, at least like a part-time second job. It's, so much love goes into these things, like weekly meetings and lots of writing and so forth. I've made a couple of AI things to help stories go and whatever, which is normally like niche stuff like creating player stories. Um, but that I guess that's as close as I've gotten to being part of that team. Is I've written some technical things that in the modern age have helped them go, and like saved people hours of work from having to write it themselves.
So you probably don't know this, but what happens is, since like suppose there's a, I use Star Wars, suppose there's a Star Wars LARP, right?
Mm,
And there's, of course, there's Darth Vader. Suppose like
mm,
five people like, only Darth Vader. Do like you say,
mm.
we'll give Darth Vader whoever pays the most money, or like how to decide like the roles, right? If you know that.
Yeah, this is interesting, and really a matter of internal politics. So I've seen every answer to this question. There are times, and these are, I think, less socially healthy, when people who are putting the most time in, who are kind of the leaders of or whatever, just declare these things by fiat. They're basically like, oh, okay, well, somebody really wanted to be a super wizard, and so I'm just going to let them do it, but only they can do it. It's tough because it tends to breed negative feelings if you just do it that way. The games that I've seen, what they tend to do is to have some other kind of currency that's meant to stand in for um, the amount that you're familiar with or have put into the game. So the games that I'm working with right now they use a thing called glory, which is like you accumulate a little bit of this for coming to game. You accumulate a little bit more if you like help out with things, or like if you help clean up the site. And it's never really large amounts. The idea is that over time you sort of accumulate this, and then you can buy weird concepts with it like that. Like if somebody, yeah, if it was, yeah, to translate to your analogy there, like if it was a Star Wars thing and somebody's like, well, I want to be a dark Jedi, or I want to be this particular character, then the people in charge would go like, okay, well, you can do that, but we can't have like five Darth Vaders running around. It'll break everything. Um, so you can do it, but it's going to like cost this glory cost, which essentially just means you have to be around a while and like do something else so that we can kind of see how you're playing. And that actually leads me into a theory that I had about gaming that might be useful for solving this sort of thing. So when I first was the storyteller, I wrote a sort of vampire and mage game, again, White Wolf Systems. So it must be like 12, 15 years ago now. It was tabletop. It wasn't a LARP. It was just we were all going to get together, and I had this story that was kind of a tale of two cities, kind of rip off, and a bunch of intrigue. And and before we started, I set all the players down. I basically said, okay, well, first tell me a story, just open ended. It's not going to be points yet. Just tell me a story about who your character is, where they come from, what was their background, what was the worst thing they ever did, what was the best thing they ever did, was there anybody they really cared about, where is that person now, just all this stuff. And that was useful to make characters and to figure out what the story hooks would be. But I also then sat down, and at the time I thought this was a throwaway question. I was like, well, what, why are you here? Like, is it just because we're friends? Are we just playing a game because we want something to do? If you're here for like another reason, what is it? Like, what could I do to make this fun? And I expected there to be a random stack of answers. But what I found, and what I've found since then, is that there were roughly three. And I call this the Bilbo Batman Deadpool theory of gaming. So, but you already kind of know what it is, right? I almost don't have to explain Bilbo Batman Deadpool. The point is that there's roughly three sorts of fun that people keep, and you can have more than one, but like there's roughly three sorts of fun that people feel are fun in this sort of environment. The one where you're sort of underpowered and unsure, and you're doing your best against really big odds, and you might not make it. And if you do, it's a really big win, right? It feels great because like you outsmarted the thing, or like your team came together, the power of friendship, whatever. And it's the sort of Bilbo character. Um, Batman, and I've met a bunch of people who are Batman players, want to have a thing for everything and never lose. They would be very unhappy if they lost and like everybody died. The dragon just ate them. This just doesn't like stand up to the story. The story is that they're the hero, and that's fine. And in general, they want to never be flat-footed, which is almost the opposite, but not quite the opposite of the Bilbo character. Um, and the Deadpool character just is cognizant that they're playing a game and that the stakes are therefore not life and death, and never comes off that point. So this is the person who every the canonical everybody meets in the tavern, right? And then um there's a wizard in the corner, and the wizard like says, I'll give you whatever this gem if you go defeat the thing. The sort of classic whatever. The adventure starts and someone is like, I try and seduce the wizard, or like I go and start a bar fight randomly. Um, and usually, if there's only one of these people, everyone else just looks at them like, "But why did you do that? That's not real. Not what a real person would do." And the answer is because, on some sense, if you knew that you were playing a game, if you had put on a VR headset before this and you still had the memory of that happening, you'd be kind of unhinged in that world, as evidenced by people's interactions with real VR worlds, right? They do crazy stuff, but just jump off a bridge because I know I'm not really going to die, and so what I learned was all of those were real fun. None of those is like not a real thing, and none of those is something you shouldn't have fun doing, but they don't necessarily play that well together. And I really had to work on this. Um, it's actually often okay to have like one Deadpoolish character, and as long as they kind of rein it in a little bit, it can be fun. But you have to know that, and like sort of provide situations for that to play well. It is hard to play like Bilbo's and Batman's together because of this fundamental breach where like the Bilbo character really wants to be underpowered and confused. That's where drama comes from. I see one world, you see another, we disagree, there's inter-party drama, but at the same time something's attacking us, all of that chaos. And the Batman character wants to win. They want to like have us all in like a phalanx that's unstoppable when the thing comes, and we all fight together, and we all like victory was never in question. We're the best. And those are really hard to resolve. So in the first game that I ever story told, I kind of came up with this theory, and I said, well, I don't know, we'll see. And but anyway, the tension seems to be along those lines. And with a LARP, it's tough because there are maybe, you know, at a good LARP, there might be 100 people. That's maybe an exaggeration. You'll see ones that are much more like 20. And somewhere in between is where a lot of things fall. But so yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the theory is very difficult if you have lots of players because you will have lots of types of fun on the field. And the people that I know who've been successful at this try to find a way that everybody has fun and doesn't conflict. And there's no one answer. So it's a constant struggle. People work really hard. And while I kind of have my 1,000-yard theories like this, I haven't put my hand into the process enough to really try and guide that.
One thing I would like to find out is like how many people like do this LARP. They're doing like, man, this is a lot of fun. I'm actually good at this, and that let me go try to be do theater or acting, right, or like be an extra in a movie. I wonder how many people like, man, I'm actually good at this, right? Let me go try to do this as a career.
Oh, that's a good question. I should actually ask. I mean, I'm close enough to that community to kind of start asking people. I think people have come the other way as well, where it's like, well, in college I did some acting, liked it, couldn't make it a career, but this is my outlet to do that.
Yeah.
I assume community theater would have a lot of the same sorts
Yeah.
of folks
Yeah,
in
that's a
it.
good point. Yeah. Community theater. Yeah.
Yeah, and my limited understanding suggests that those people at least get along quite
Yeah. And so off subject, we are talking about the AR VR headsets. Like
well.
someone posted this on social media like maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was like a 30-second video. It was like my mom tried a headset for the first time, was a disaster. So this mother had an AR VR set on, right? And she ran 100 miles an hour to the refrigerator.
Oh
Yes,
dear.
yes. Bam.
Oh dear. Yeah, it's a real issue.
Yeah.
Um,
So I thought it was kind of course, it's not funny. I mean, yeah. And of course, it's like people like, the older people, like, can't get our younger people like mastering it, right? But yeah, it's almost like you need like a warning, if you're above this age, these are the dangers of like the ARVR is not real, but like this lady ran like 100 miles an hour, right? Like and she like
oof.
bounced off the refrigerator,
Yeah.
fell down. It's like, damn, yeah. It was like she was running after something, or something was running after her.
So it's interesting because in a sense, that shows the promise of the technology. Not that we're all going to get injured, but the fact that it would feel so quickly, so real to allow that kind of like quasi limbic response to like maybe a threat or something you wanted. I remember the first time, this was way back, it's in 2015 or 2014, at the dawn of the sort of second VR revolution. The first ones in the 80s and 90s. Um, and then we sort of dished it and came back with like the Vive at the era of like the Vive. Um, we had one at the National Lab where I was working, and it was kind of a toy. People were trying to use it for data visualizations and analytics things, but it came with a full suite of stuff. And I remember I did the first demo, the Vive demo that used to be you standing on like the bow of a ship that was sunk and you were in the ocean, and then a whale comes by and sort of waves its tail at you. And the canonical thing is everyone goes, "Ugh," because it looks like it's maybe going to hit you. And so everyone really does this in real life. And that's the power of the demo. And I came away from it with two things. One of which is, yeah, this didn't feel like me going into a game at all. This felt like a place I was and then I came back from. And that is how my memory encoded it. And that's still basically true. I don't know if that's an idiosyncrasy of me or whether that's normal, but the concept of reality, it felt like if something is unreal past a certain point, your mind will push it into the realm of the unreal. You'll say, no, I'm only playing a game, and that allows you to bypass some internal brain mechanisms that would otherwise say there's a terrifying monster. You still are like afraid of imagery, but in some sense, you understand that you're sitting in a chair, you are looking at a square, and so forth. So this is the first thing that I took from that is, yeah, once if you're unreal past a certain point, your mind says, yep, we are fully unreal. Don't worry about this too much. You can go to sleep after this. But if you cross past the uncanny valley to a certain point, even though it is still unreal relative to real reality, your mind tries to help you instead. It becomes more real rather than less real. And so if you're able to get near sort of full human dive experience, um, your mind will add things rather than taking them away. And the reason I say that is because even though I did this about the whale, I came out and said I could feel the fish because there were fish swimming by and that you could kind of see them here and I could feel them brush against me. That is impossible, right? There's no haptic interface, especially back then. There was nothing doing that. It was just my brain telling me this is real enough that I will try and help you rather than hinder you to understand that this is real. And so since then I was hooked. I was an early adopter of this tech and I've had like 3 or 4 headsets since then. And but that sold me on the promise of the technology. And I still am sold. This idea that like it's no longer a thing that you did, or it's no longer really like a thing that you played or a thing that you interacted with. This was a place you went and now you're back. So in some sense, if casualties of that include running into your fridge, I hope we can do something about that, and hopefully, hopefully more gentle training on the way in. Oh, and all the new stuff has like, if you start moving past where your play space is, it'll give you sort of a virtual boundary that looks like a wall, so it'll stop you hopefully from doing that. Um, so we're working on that. We're working on the UX. UX should not include running into your fridge. But other than that, there's a lot good there.
So is this like kind of like the same process of like, back in the day, you're younger, you might watch a scary movie and have a
Mm.
bad dream, and then all the details are like even more clear in your brain than the movie was, like something like that.
Yeah, it's like if you're able to, I don't know.
Have you ever had like bad dreams, like, oh my God, this is like so real, right?
Yeah, if you have a bad dream, even though you wake up and consciously you understand that that was just a dream, it is not real. It takes a while to actually shake that off.
'Cause it's still in your brain.
Yeah, because it's still there, and you had essentially a full sensory experience of it. Um, and so it's really tough. I mean, this has all kinds of weird knock-on effects. Where once something is real enough, like for example, like deepfakes, off topic, but like deepfakes just basically got good enough in the last handful of years, that you can show a deepfake to someone, tell them this is fake, here's how I faked it, and they will still kind of believe the content. Um, it's a frightening thing and a little off topic, but anyway, I believe, and maybe if anybody wants to chime in who's better at neuroscience, which would be almost everyone who studies neuroscience at all, whether or not that's true, whether there's sort of an invisible line where on one side your brain sort of pushes it out, on the other side it's kind of pulls it in. It's how it feels, but I don't know if that's really true.
So what age were you when you first got interested in tech? I'm guessing you were like a young guy, like
Oh yeah, no, I don't really remember a time when I wasn't. It was just
so long as you can remember.
yeah, it was just a question of gradually developing skills and knowledges and so forth. I remember some of the earliest stuff. Um, my parents were kind of collectors of like electronic junk and so forth. So we had just a bunch of random parts. Back when it wasn't certain if you put a card into a computer whether that would really work, even though the slot was right, maybe the bus interface was wrong, and you trying to write drivers for things. And I remember I had like a what was it, a VT220 terminal, um, VT100. It was whichever one. I think it was the 100. It was whichever one was a monochrome screen and a dumb terminal with nothing on the back. And I found like a 9600 baud modem and had to read through a manual to figure out what I put into a dumb terminal to say down the serial line. Um, Please dial the phone. And then after that, I was like looking for bulletin board systems. When would this have been? Early 90s, I want to say. And since then, the prospect of doing things in software and communications was like everything to me. I was no good at hardware also. I'm still pretty bad at hardware. So my thoughts on like, do we make a system that has hardware is like, oh yeah, well, I'll make a system that has a Raspberry Pi in it, and then the last little leg will be coming out of a data acquisition board or a DAC, and then everything will happen in software, and that's how I'll do it. And that's kind of defined a lot of my career. So I was never really good at making amplifiers or making formal circuits work, but I was decent at software.
So I could be wrong, but I think Pong came out like 40, 50 years ago. So like 40, 50 years went from Pong to AR, VR, AI, all this advanced stuff, right? Can you talk about like how tech has advanced? So this is like overarching question: how tech has advanced so fast, and what are the implications of tech maybe and probably outpacing human society being able to deal with it?
Yeah, no, I mean, if there's a point where that's about to happen, we're certainly standing on top of it. Um, the idea of tech going quickly, I think.
Isn't there a term for that? I can't think of what the term was. It's in
Oh,
some
the the,
rule.
the singularity or
Yeah,
whatever. Think of,
yeah.
I
We're like if tech, the 1+2, 2+4 rule, like it advances like exponentially or something.
Yeah, I used to before I had heard the term the singularity back in the 90s or whatever. I used to have a thing that I called like the infinite point, because so this is not a unique concept. This idea, essentially what I did is I looked back at history, right? And I read the history that I had my hands on anyway, and I tried to figure out at some point in if I picked a point in time, you know, 100 AD or whatever, um, you know, 1000 BCE or whatever it is, how long would you have had to go into a coma, and then wake up for the world to be essentially somewhat incomprehensible, for the technology to change enough that you go, wow, we can do that? How are we doing that? That's magic. And even though I was a kid and I was doing really rough math, I noticed that it was sort of halving as time went on, that there was sort of this logarithmic or exponential, continuum. And I tried to project it forward in the whatever mid 90s, and I got I think a date of 2018. which I have to give my young self some credit, is not horribly off.
Yeah, I saw something where people predicting 2020, no, I'm
Mm,
2033, something like that for
mm.
singularity.
Yeah, it's certainly, since you're projecting basically when a thing that is exponential reaches infinity, you know, fundamentally it sort of never does what, but really, I mean, in science, the concept of a singularity doesn't normally mean something strictly goes to infinity. It means that whatever the dynamics were that we were using before to describe this pattern have broken down, and it will now be limited by whatever the next thing is. And I think the next thing right now is sort of human acceptance or our social structures. So it's hard to describe why things move faster and faster. I know that there are also moments where some enabling technology becomes finished enough that it can be handed as a product to the next engineers and the next thinkers and so forth. And that definitely sort of just happened with generative AI, which I'm sure we're going to get into here. Um, but so the question is, have we moved to the point where our speed of movement is now governed by the next thing, where the next thing is, yes, some combination of the number of engineers that care to spend their lives trying to push um, people's acceptance of and development of systems that are going to move into normally human things, our social structure finding some way for like displaced people to still have a life and be okay. um, and that last one is really important, that there are a lot of, I'll say, technical minds that I have met that had a vision kind of like what I did and are now concerned that we won't get the good social outcomes. So, on a fundamental level, if you look at productivity of most industries, through the Industrial Revolution and through the Information Age and so forth, most of them have just gone crazily upward. A point of fact, the number of human hours that it takes to make like an ear of corn or a college class or a tire for a car, whatever thing. The number of human hours per thing has just gone down and down and down and down, and it's trending towards zero, right? And so you might look at this and say something like, "All right, every industry out there, you're all about to get this new enabling technology. It's finally going to push human productivity to infinity." What I mean by that is your can of Coke will take zero human hours, or it'll take some infinitesimal amount, technically. So that means that it's possible that in the future, Coke, if it exists, the company will only employ, five people. It'll be like a CEO, two lawyers, an engineer, and a digital salesperson, and then that's it. And if that happens and nothing else were to change, you would imagine that Coke's profit margin would then basically be infinity. They sort of don't need to pay anybody and they still make the entire product and they still sell the entire product. However, all the people that worked at Coke and everywhere else that's doing the same pattern also drink Coke. And so somehow they need to get Coke. And so I think what everyone, and this may be an abdication of our social responsibility, said is we're tech heads. We're going to make the technology that lets this happen. And we're sure that we'll find a way. We'll increase, corporate tax, as we expect this meteoric rise in profit to come up. We're going to increase corporate tax to mostly meet it.
And
So
use that tech to do UBI or something like that. Maybe.
or something like that. And it's weird because this was like a secret thought that I had in 2005. I went, "Oh, we have a shot at this at the Star Trek future where like money isn't a thing anymore and everything's basically for free, and so you can decide what to do with your life even if that's nothing, even if you just want to be like, or something but that wouldn't normally have like gotten you money. I just want to be a person who really cares about kids. And I just want to be the world's greatest snowboarder. And I want to write this great novel. And I want to keep making AI technology. Whatever it is, you wouldn't have to worry about like, well, what's the bottom line here? Can I do this? Am I allowed? And everybody had the thought just then. I've now had like 100 coffee conversations with people who were sort of tech heads from this area who all said, "Yeah, no, I assumed this was going to happen, and I assumed now was the time." Like basically in 2020s, we would do this. Doesn't seem like we're doing it, and I don't know why. I've heard that 100 times now, and it was certainly my experience as well. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you're one of those people either, but it definitely was a thing that I don't understand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget, like, people talk, "Oh, the AI is gonna take the jobs," but, like, when the cars
Mm,
took horses away, oh, people, like, shoveling shit, they're gonna lose their jobs.
mm.
Like, every generation, 20 years, something comes, all the jobs are gonna go away. And actually, those more jobs created, right? So,
Well, this is the other side of this. It's possible that we will just continue to create jobs, and the jobs will be decent. Um, I'm concerned that we're creating jobs at the bottom end, and there's less that do
yeah,
well.
like, I mean, freelance work and gig work is good, but man, like, you have to have if you're a gig worker with 20 jobs or 20 different people, like, how is that really good, you know?
Yeah, and meanwhile, I'm in this position of extreme privilege where I just happen to have grabbed on to like machine learning and simulations and so forth and loved it so much that I made it a career. And that's, I've had this trajectory um, essentially just because I really liked applied statistics
Yeah.
because that was something that was good to me. I have a friend who is, I think, one of the best visual artists in a generation. And I would say she is at least as good an artist as I am a scientist, and who's like constantly sort of struggling. And it always occurs to me is every time we talk, I'm like, we're the same person. We just loved different things. And the thing that I loved, people showed up with a paycheck for consistently for like 25 years. And you've had to like struggle and make commissions and so forth. I don't know. There's a cosmic difficulty with accepting that. I don't like that the world is that way. So maybe we all dreamed up a way it could stop being that way. Still hope it happens.
Yeah. So back to you, but you out for a minute. So I'm from Texas. No, Texas pretty conservative. And so either in Austin or Houston did an experiment where like they gave $1,000 a month to like homeless people or like random people, right?
Mhm.
And of course, everyone like, man, they're gonna waste some money on drugs or whatever case. And actually, stats came back. Of course, the people getting the money did the stats. You got to take it with a grain of salt, I think you know. But
Mhm.
according to the stats, 80% of people actually use the money for like basic housing. Actually do use it like, of course, 20% like using on drugs, right? But so most people would say, man, 80% use it for like what it's supposed to. That's a pretty good
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yeah, no, that's tremendously valuable. And as I think a bunch of people have noted, the other thing is that in general, because of that, um, if you do this, the money tends to go directly back into the immediate economy. So
Mhm.
it's anyway, it's not really pocketed or put in some unproductive place. You're
Yeah.
not, you're then employing like a bunch of other people in the service economy and making products that we care about, and so forth. So I don't know. It's not, the opposite, I guess, would be if people like pocketed it and then just invested it in some other thing, and
Yeah,
it was
I,
sort of
I I
collective
think the
growth.
fear was that everyone thought we give these people $1,000 a month, they're going to spend it on drugs and stuff, right? And I guess for the stats they did, it's like 20% actually did that, but 80% were like, okay, they actually found a place to live and like did basic needs. So I thought that was kind of surprising.
That's great.
So next question I ask you, I want you to like answer it in the way of like giving advice to people when like follow your career path, right?
Mm.
So like talk about your educational path, right? Like how did you decide to get your PhD? How do you decide to do all this high vis, data science, AI, ML stuff at University of Washington? And do the answer like suppose there's like somebody that's like 13, 14 years old, they're interested in this stuff.
Oh yeah, this is actually a funny question. It occurs to me this is the one thing that's actually can. I'm going to try and make it real, but how many times now, right? Have you said, well, here's, my name's Jason and here's where I come from and here's my background. It just occurred to me that I'm actually going to have to try and pull this off of the canned speech that I have. I bet you have one of these that's 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I do too. It's just an interesting thing. I want that not to be unreal in that way. So I'm going to try and say it differently than I normally would. So, yeah, thank you. So when I was young, I knew I really cared about the way things worked. Um, and this was often something that made me really happy. It's just like understanding another thing about the way things worked and interacted. Um, I think I felt like there must be some answer to the overall pattern of the universe, so that anything that I didn't understand, I could just apply these patterns. is probably a lot of that is being, a young autistic child and doing my best. I want there to be patterns. They're sort of both comforting and useful. And so that's sort of where I started. That I knew I really wanted to go to college to study something. And when I got to, basically there were a few things in front of me. Um, but applied math and physics were sort of the ones that drew me the hardest. Where I was and when I was, there wasn't really computer science. Where I was, when did I actually go? I think I went in 1995 to a nice liberal arts college, Lewis and Clark College. It's still great, but at the time they had, I think, one professor who was into computer science, and I did end up learning from him. But basically there wasn't a an obvious oh, there wasn't a major in it, rather. Sorry. There wasn't like a minor, but it was considered an offshoot of math. And that professor, who in question, who I love the guy to death, basically always came from the perspective that like a computer is a box you do math on. You want to do math. We all want to do math, obviously. So, you have this box, and this box helps you do numerical problems. That was how I came into it. And it actually served me pretty well for a while, but I still only like learned a bit of C and so on. And I eventually got because I wanted to do an honors thesis, which required research. I went to worked in the lab of a professor named John Abele, who we were doing low temperature physics at the time. So it was superconductivity, sort of back in the 90s, and it we had basically a superconducting film material that was laboriously produced by, I think, evaporating ovens, and then that had to live, because of the superconducting question, in a vat of liquid helium, which then had a vacuum jacket around that, then liquid nitrogen, vacuum and liquid nitrogen again, and a superconducting magnet in it. So we could put this huge magnetic field across it and start driving current across it. So because of this, we had a lab with like really six instruments and like um, three or four knobs that basically you had to turn in the right order. And one of the big things, even though I did write something about superconductivity as a thesis, I feel like my real thesis was automating that lab. That was my first exposure to like, well, if I understand software and hardware, the commodity hardware exists, I can just put those two skills together. And now all of a sudden we only need one person to run the lab instead of like three, which is what sort of I accomplished by the end of my time there. And I talked about a specific regime of high temperature superconductors, and it was fine. But that really got me into this idea that I could do a lot with a computer that wasn't strictly math, but had math within it. So then I went to grad school, and same kind of thing. You go to grad school. I went to grad school at the University of Washington. And when you go in for physics, the first couple of years are like a blur. It's just wall to wall, like 14-hour days every day, 8 on weekends, live in the department, you never see the sun during the winter. And I loved it. It was, it was a really good time. Um, and I eventually took a research position also there, working on a thing called the Gamma Ray Large Area Space Telescope, which is now called Fermi because they give them the good names once they launch and do not blow up and work. Uh, and
And how did you
yeah,
get that position? Is like part of an internship or part of your
yeah,
like your you had to do
yeah.
your PhD?
It's something you have to do a dissertation, get your PhD, and there is no formal process for it. You really have to go hunting down people. So there's a weird kind of speed dating kind of thing where everyone asks everyone else, well, who's doing what? What do you want to do? And there are always a couple of professors. Like the really smart one is particle theory, right? Like everyone wants to do particle theory. That's the smartest thing you can do. And I'm like, well, and I ended up doing computational astrophysics, which is like kind of the other end of the spectrum. I always say this because computational astrophysics sounds impressive, like in a way that maybe it shouldn't. Um, Not that it wasn't hard, but particle theorists are the sort of crazy people that are known to be super intelligent. So, but I really wanted to work on something in space, and I really liked detectors, and I really liked computational things. So I ended up kind of asking around and ended up working on the glass project, but it hadn't really been built yet. So a lot of my work was simulations and then optimizations. So this is the one end of uh, computer simulation and question answering stuff where you have heavy physics knowledge about what's about to happen and you simulate a thing. In this case, like a detector in low Earth orbit looking at the universe and a bunch of particles coming in, interacting with the detector and like figure out what data would then come off it. And then you change something like, well, I'll change the thickness of this shielding part and see how it would change the output and how it would ultimately change the performance to see whether it's worth it. And so in this way, a bunch of the detector was sort of defined and made. Um, and that kind of process, I think of it as one end because the other end is going to be machine learning. Spoilers for this conversation, but like the other end's about to be machine learning. This end is I simulate a thing, I optimize a thing, I maybe have like one free parameter that we don't know about. And if we want to find out what that parameter is, we might have some data and then we tweak whatever we are unsure about until the real data looks like the fake data. And we say, okay, that must have been the thing I'm simulating. Sorry, that's a bit archaic to say it that way. But so I came out of this and I also made a detection algorithm because gamma rays are fairly hard to detect and you don't get that many of them, especially from distant sources. So and some of them are truly diffuse. They just come from the middle of nowhere. Thing called the cosmic microwave background photons. They're really low energy photons. And then there are cosmic rays, basically very high energy, often charged things. And if one smacks into the other one, it can take the low energy photon and shift it all the way up into a gamma ray or an X-ray. So some of them come from nowhere. And then you have these really dim, diffuse sources. And so trying to make a detection algorithm was challenging. And part of I was told later that some of the stuff that I wrote during that time went into making the sky catalog that came off of the detector once it was in orbit. So very happy about that. Um, but once I did my dissertation and graduated, there's really no money in astrophysics. I mean, like a little bit, but it's arcane and it comes from weird places. And um, but what had happened was that this was just post 9/11. Think about it, it's like 2004. And everybody really cared about nuclear security. And so I went to work at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, we have a national lab like, Lawrence Livermore or Berkeley or whatever in our own backyard. It's over in Richland, Washington. It's like start in Seattle, go east like 3 hours, and you basically find it. So I worked with them. It's a really good time. I ended up working with them for like 12 years. But at first, I was postdocing and I did the same sort of thing, like simulating detectors, optimizing what those detectors should look like or have in them. But it was all on the ground. It was like, well, we want to make sure that there are no stray or or smuggled or whatever radioactive sources out there. And so, but every year that I was there, even though I'd kind of become an old hand at simulating stuff directly and doing these optimizations, we needed more stuff like detection algorithms. Um, and so I sort of took a hand at that, and gradually, for all 12 years, every year I would move a little bit away from we have a lot of physics knowledge, there's only a couple things we don't know, and let's find them, towards there is a really open-ended thing. All we have is examples of it. We don't know what model to put against this to like detect a thing or understand a thing. So we need really flexible, open-ended models, which is basically what modern machine learning is. So essentially, I came in doing very specific radiation transport optimizations on like detectors, and I came out doing research on autoencoders for like generalized anomaly detection that can use any kind of input stream. Um, that was basically the end of my tenure at the lab. I was actually really happy about that work. If people are familiar with, well, I can get into what an autoencoder is in a minute. Maybe it's less germane to this story, but um, the point is, we made a thing which is now widely used. The technique, which is um, just basically training a neural net to try and copy and paste the same thing with a very limited data set, so that when you did that in the future, and the algorithm said like you're basically trying to get the algorithm to say, "Huh, what is that?" And when it says, "Huh, what is that?" you go, "Ah, you haven't seen that before, so that's unusual." And we showed this on like human heartbeats. If somebody, you could train this on somebody's heart, and then if they were having a heart attack or an arrhythmia, it would pick that up, even though it didn't know what a heartbeat was and it didn't know what arrhythmia was. It knew something just went weird. Very proud of that work. And now that's like very common in the field of neural net stuff, but that was what, 2015, 2014. So at that point, I had a friend who worked at a startup studio in Seattle. This is one of the places, sort of a incubator style thing where they would ideate, come up with ideas, work them out, and like spin out prototypes, and then help people start companies based on them. Hopefully, I'm characterizing that well. But he knew, I think, only that I had done a bunch of radiation detector stuff, and they wanted to try like a novel radiation detector, which was very off their line. Didn't normally do hardware or any of that kind of thing. I said, yeah, sure. And the concept turned out to be, instead of radiation hardening computer memory, they tried to soften it. So that the idea behind hardening is, if high energy charge particles or whatever hit um, elements of the memory, it might flip bits. They try and stop that from happening as much as they can. We had some techniques to try and make it happen more often, to see if we could then use arbitrary RAM, so like stuff that's in your laptop or the phone, as a radiation detector. It turns out the answer was probably yes, but to two orders of magnitude less than would matter. So yes, but also no. And I had loaned myself to the startup studio, those labs, as like a visiting scientist for 3 months. And we found out in basically a month and a quarter that this thing wasn't going to work. But I was still there. And so my friend said, well, what else do you do? And I said, well, actually, for the better part of a decade, I've been much more of this thing called a data scientist, which is somebody that does analyses. You've probably heard of machine learning. Again, this is like, say, 2016. And so he basically said, okay, go do something. So I worked with one of the engineers to get data from an online multiplayer game. And since you could get this stuff on an API from like a streaming source as these games were being played, I made a little machine learning thing to figure out who was most likely to win, and like showed how good it was, and did some of the, the sort of classic, what we call supervised machine learning techniques now. And it worked. And that actually ended up taking several intense pivots internally, but becoming a little company called Taunt, which I can't remember. I think it got acquired later on. Need to check out what became of that. But I was absolutely hooked because, unlike the national lab, I had just done something for real. Like, I had produced a thing that became a product that then was of interest, that people wanted, and we could spin it out and turn it into something. And this was something that you don't get deeper in academia. There are a lot of benefits to working in academia, but you don't get that one. Often what happens is you have your good idea, you ask for money, you hope that it comes. If it comes, it'll be like 6 months from now, and then it needs to sort of go through another process. So it's like a year out that you have to think of your cool thing and then actually start doing it, if you got funding. That's a little bit of a mischaracterization. There are some things that continue, but if you have a new idea, it's often that kind of standoff. So back when I was at the lab, I was continually getting scooped by like Google and Stanford, where we'd have a good idea, we'd start putting it into practice, and then 2 days later, they'd go, "Oh, there was a paper from Google doing exactly this, and it works great." Okay, great, but we had to have this idea like 8 months ago. So I feel like I'm starting the drag race like
And
5 seconds
you're
late.
talking about your time at Pioneer Square Labs, right?
Oh no, well, this is sort of why Pioneer School Labs is so attractive, because this was more of when I was at the National Lab, the uh, money streams tend to have a lot of momentum. So if you win them, you tend to win them again, and there's a lot of, you go and chat with sponsors, you make sure that you're doing kind of research that they're supposed to be sponsoring, and that they are happy with what you've done. And there's sort of all of this sort of slow politics that happens. And so I was the sort that always wanted to like break down walls and try new things, and do a bunch of stuff. And that played all right, but not too well with the national lab structure, at least at the time. Um, I think they have more internal investiture and AI things now, so I don't want to throw them under that bus. But at the time, it was difficult for me, at least, to say, "Hey, it'd be cool. I think we could do this," and then actually go do it. But in the startup world, I could. And so they said, okay, well, just be our head data scientist. You're the only data scientist, and we're not sure what to do with the data scientist, but we want you around. So why don't you start building things and we'll figure it out. For like 4 years, we built everything. I have a million of these and I'll go on forever if you let me. But everything. That was right when convolutional neural nets and computer vision was getting really big. When all of a sudden, instead of having like 20,000 examples of a dog and a cat, you could say, well, I already have a pre-cooked algorithm and I have 30 examples of like cancer and 100 examples of not cancer. And that's enough to like it essentially do transfer learning on this network and still train something that would now tell you what was cancer and what wasn't to a pretty good degree. Everybody lost their minds. Man, we made a bunch of stuff based on that. We tried a bunch of weird things.
So how did y'all decide what to work on? Like with all the had to be like hundreds of things, the cool things to work on. How do you decide what to focus on?
Um, I have to thank Pioneer Square Labs a lot for giving me this kind of validation idea. When I showed up, I really didn't know what a startup was or how it worked. I just knew like somebody pays you and then you do what you want and you make a product. But as it turns out, there's a lot of really good best practices understanding out there, and PSL was great at having a validation process. So all the things that you would want, like if right now you have an awesome idea and you walk into a venture capitalist office and you say, "I got this great idea, would you give me money for it?" They're always going to ask you a bunch of questions. Those questions are basically, all right, who's going to buy it? Like, what's your ideal customer profile? If all those people bought it, how much would you basically make? Like if you full saturated this market, everybody loved it. It was the best thing since sliced bread. All the ICPs bought it. How much essentially would your total addressable market be? And so they want to know that number. Um, are you certain that you can build it? Is there still technical risk, or is this a thing you can definitely do via engineering? Often that was my arena to figure out whether some new AI or machine learning thing would fly, or whether it was sort of ready for prime time. They'll ask you what your team is. Like, have you guys done this before? You know, has the CEO been a CEO on anything? What sort of thing? Has the CTO been a CTO before on what sort of thing? Um, and then a scattering of other stuff as well. Like go-to-market strategy is a little more esoteric, but sort of a broad concept that just means like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to put a bunch of ads on Facebook? If so, is that going to work? Why do we think that's going to work? What's your outgoing sales process? If you're trying to sell some kind of B2B thing where I sell a whole platform to another company, then it's a really long sales process and you need to have like a lot of people on board. But if you're going to sell direct to consumers, maybe just put ads on Facebook. People show up. So that, the go-to-market strategy, I think that's most of them. But so what would happen, just given all of that is the picture, like those are the things you need to win. And if you go ask venture capitalists for money, they're going to say, please answer these questions before you come in here. Um, we would have basically ideation sessions where at that point it was anything goes, just anything on the table, whatever you've been thinking about, whatever you think would be cool. For me, it was often like new AI things because I'm reading papers and testing things. And people would then, like, once we codified them, people would then knock them down. Most of them knocked down immediately for one of these aforementioned vector of things you got to have. You'd say, well, the people who want to buy it can't, and the people who don't want to buy it can, and it's the problem. And some of them just needed better definition. Very good idea, and we don't know who would be the CEO, but we think we know someone who might. So if they didn't get knocked down, they're still basically on the board. There was a little bit of consensus. Somebody then had to champion. So this was the most interesting part. Like basically somebody, and it could be anybody, it could be the people from marketing, people from design, it could be me, engineers would say, you know what, I care about this one enough. I think this is the cool one. I'm going to go and push on this. Meaning I'm normally going to do whatever my magic is a little bit to prove out the piece that we need on my end a little bit more. And then once I've done that, I'll try and get a couple other people to spend a little of their time. So there was again a little like internal push and shove going on where somebody would go, no, you gotta come and do your marketing tests for this because this is gonna be great. So we'd all try and talk each other in, which means everybody was pitching all the time. Like you just go, we should do this for practice. You go like sit down at lunch and go like, pitch me something. What have you been thinking about? Oh, well, I think we should do this because that. Anyway, so once that went forward for a little bit, and you kind of had those, whatever I said, 6 questions, at least basically laid out, then there'd be kind of a more formal like go, no go decision. We'd get the, managing directors in there, pitch them on it, explain why we think it's a good idea. We'd all deliberate, and still maybe half of them died right then. Just because, the investors are good at investing. They know what's most
And
likely to
Pioneer
work.
Square Labs is still around, right? That's still
Oh yeah,
business.
yeah, absolutely.
So you might not know this, but like I'm sure it's really competitive to get accepted rate for like what's the
Yeah.
accept? You remember the acceptance rate was like 1%, 10%?
Oh God. Okay. So if I had to, I don't know formally, but like if I had to guess, I'd say once we were out of an ideation session, maybe 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 really made it to the point where the MDs would sit in a room and go, yeah, you know what? Go ahead and put some resources against this. We're going to start seeing if we can find a founding team. Let's try and make this fly. And the 1 in 5 was already culled by a few. Like, during the ideation session, it's like people would throw out 30 things and like four would still basically be on the board and sort of not knocked down. Then of those four, like somebody would pick one, maybe two if they were really good, and start running on them. And we do these every couple of weeks or every month. So if I basically give an order of magnitude up front, like I had a cool idea, I'm going to go and talk about it, to okay, we can put a couple of weeks against this and see if it flies. That's like a factor of 10. And then essentially it was still a factor of 2 or 3 at that second sort of like red light, green light point. So I want to say, and again, like I can't speak to this formality. I'm sure they have this number because they have a lot of tools for this, but I never really looked specifically. Um, so that's probably 1 in 30 or something.
Okay.
It's like a few percent. It's like maybe 2 to 5% of, hey, I got a cool idea. Eventually made it so that we were really trying to make that one go.
And when a company gets accepted, like how long does it last? Like 3 months, 4 months? Like what's the
So this was all over the place. This has also surprised me because the validation process was very consistent and good in that everybody, this place was just full of folks who had been like successful investors, successful founders. So they all kind of knew what to say to a venture capitalist. So they knew what could kill the thing. Um, so what would happen at that point is they tried to put all the pieces together to successfully get the thing funded, which is basically that vector of things that I mentioned again, only harder this time. It's like they had to make the case rock solid that like the technology would work. You had to basically say, here's my team. No, really, they said if we do this, they're on board. Here's what they've done before. We had to like do more rigorous market testing. So I said, look, I put out an ad that suggested this thing existed already, and 5% of the people who saw it clicked on it. That's crazy, and you would sort of line up all of these facts and turn them into a deck and sort of start handing them to this team that we're bringing on to run it. And that whole process was all over the map. It would take like, it would be almost instantaneous some of the time. It was like 3 weeks. Yeah, we did it all. Somebody's really on board. Yeah, we showed it. Yeah, it's perfect. Let's try and get it funded. And then some of them were like 6 months and we gave up. So that was surprisingly one off. I think the process became, yeah, the process was kind of like wild and woolly up front when we were all throwing out stuff. Then it kind of got narrow where people went like, no, here are really the 6 concepts. We have to hit all these. All these have to be green lights or it's a red light. It's not going to work. And then it kind of got less specific again. And somewhere in there, the new founding team that the MDs and everyone else had found and worked with kind of started to take over. Um, and then normally we would do tech to one side of like MVP or minimum viable product. It was either we had made a demo to prove that this would work, and then we threw the demo in the trash. We gave them the demo, but like no one was going to use it, and we would help them rewrite it into proper code. That would often be like, okay, but our database is just a CSV file, and like there is no back end. It's really
yeah,
just like my
there's a
laptop.
lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, and then you just throw that off the
This
table
this
and
is
go
the
like, yeah.
vision, but that's what I'm really doing right now.
Mm. I've done a lot of that, but occasionally, depending on time, and if they hadn't hired engineers or whatever, sometimes we would then be that team and start taking them really towards like proper back ending and like cloud infrastructure, support and so forth. Um, I don't know. I think that was about 2 and 3. It was like two demos that then we were going to hand them and explain how to do it again. And one, yeah, we really pushed this basically into a real product before it got funded. And then ideally, they would get them through like a seed round of funding and
Now,
they'd,
does Finance Girl Lab, do they
yeah,
have their own like VC arm to fund companies, or
yeah,
they help the founders
they,
meet people and get?
they do now. So sometime after I showed up, but before I left, they raised a VC fund specifically. And so there is one. Um, I don't think, don't quote me on this. I don't think they tend to directly fund their own people just because it would seem like a weird signal. And this is the thing, there's a lot of weird signals in this industry. But like if they, if they said, hey, there's people who came out of our incubator and we're also going to be the main funding source because we also have a VC arm. Um, it would look weird. I think they do have some deal where maybe they give some kind of additional funding and then it's part of it, but I don't think they like to lead rounds. Try and make sure that somebody else is on board so that it's an overt signal of like success. And I, again, don't quote me on that because I know there are aspects specifically to VC funding that are very complex and that I'm probably misrepresenting a little.
And how long ago were you with Pioneer Square Labs?
That would have been, let's say 2016 through like just a second. Maybe like oh yeah, through that's right, through like late 2020 because COVID happened there.
Okay. So I'm sure you met and talked to a lot of founders, right? Some successful, some not successful.
Mhm.
From your point of view, what were the values or characteristics that successful founders had that the unsuccessful founders did not have?
This is actually quite interesting. I wish that I had a better answer for this. I want to ask you this one too after I maybe say something about it. But to tell you the truth, it was really tough. There were things that I thought led to success, but there were just sort of prerequisites. Like, for example, one of the things that a CEO probably doesn't do is anything other than say every day is a great day and we're all going to the moon. And the reason is because they're sort of the captain of a ship. Whoever it is if they have bad days and they say I don't believe in this, how is anyone else going to believe in it and do their job? So they're stuck in some sense. They're the one person who's not allowed to have a bad day, or show it. So
And they can't tell no one. They can't tell the co-founder. I mean, they can't tell the investors,
yeah.
like, I mean,
Yeah, I think maybe there's sort of a captain and first officer thing where behind closed doors, like maybe the CEO and the CTO can sort of hash that stuff out. But yeah, at least what I've seen is for the rest of folks, they need to present this front where like everything is fine, even if we don't know where funding is coming from, even if we're not sure about what's coming next, even if some technology has just failed, now we're not sure how we're going to fix it. They still have to present that, at least mostly. And that actually is an issue with transparency now that I think about it. Because the downside of this, right, is if somebody says, yeah, I know everything's fine, everything's great, don't worry about it, everything going to the moon, and then the next day they're like, actually, we're shutting our doors, everyone go home.
yeah.
And
Or like,
that's clearly too far to one
or what's
side.
that one company? I think it was Coinbase did a Super Bowl commercial, and then the next day laid off like 10% of the people or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's you. So you shouldn't do that. But I've seen people do bad news really well, where they basically say, hey, look, with full disclosure, here is the bad news. Here's what I think we have to do about it. Here's how we're getting back on track, and then kind of go on. And so there's sort of a moment where they do communication, and then they sort of go back to, we're going to be great. So that's one thing. I don't know. The cynic in me says, well, they just have had to fail at it a few times. That's actually true for a lot of people. Not everybody. I've seen people who seem to be very successful the first time they do this, but a lot of the deciding factor that seems to come out of VCs is like, has your CEO been a CEO before? And I think the perspective is it's very rare to make it the first time, and you need to fail so that you learn a bunch of like really hard lessons. I don't know if that's fair or not. In fact, it feels unfair, especially if it's your first time.
Yeah.
But that's one thing that I've heard, and I'm not sure I totally believe.
Yeah. With me, the California is like, I mean, I've heard it before, the VC, we're the back someone who failed before, right?
Yeah.
But okay, so you want to fail, you want to back someone who's already proven they can fail
Yeah.
versus someone who has, I've never followed that logic. But I know a lot of
Yeah.
VCs do.
Yeah. I don't even, it's, yeah, a friend of mine once said to not do a model, and I never did that model. The idea was if you took everything about a business that was just about to happen, all their pitch deck, all of their concept and whatever, and ground it down to like all the text and all the very, addressable market and so forth, could you guess as to their chance of success before they started? And this friend of mine who shall remain nameless for to protect the guilty or whatever said, no, don't do that. What you're going to find is only one thing will matter. It's whether your CEO was ever a CEO before, and then everything else is random. And if we find that out, it's going to be really depressing to everyone. And I went, I don't know if I totally believe that. But there was a part of me that was like, are we just, you know, in some to some extent, are we just rolling very loaded dice? And the goal is to do it as many times as possible. I don't think so. At least you can't think that way. Certainly, it's like successful CEOs don't think that way. They think this is it.
Yeah.
This is the moonshot. This is the one that's going all the way. Um, and so that's one aspect. You
Well,
have
that's
to
the
be
one.
all the way in it.
Yeah, you gotta be delusional too. I think, like, stats show 95% of startups fail, but I'll be the 5%, who's gonna make it.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's quite loaded in that way. Um, that's an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting perspective. I again, I'm very spoiled in this way because the things that make me go are essentially, are there hard puzzles and can I try and outsmart and outthink some kind of system? And do the things that I do have a chance of helping somebody's life at some point? And those are kind of my two guiding stars. And really, there's a lot of this other stuff where people want to know, well, what's the cut? What's the bottom line? And, what are our real chances of success and so forth that bother me, I think, less than other folks. But again, that's a very engineery, sciency perspective to have.
Yeah.
And people absolutely need to be worried about those things. So that's, I don't know if there's anything else that really typifies a successful CEO from an unsuccessful one.
And then, of course, we are talking the VCs want, entrepreneurs to be CEOs 2 or 3 times, right? But my thing is, right, if you're a full-time CEO, you're probably not making any money, right? So who would really has a resource that I could be a full-time CEO for a startup, like at 2 or 3 failed startups for to get it right, you know?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, it's true of working in the early stage, almost at any stage. Like you get a paycheck once everyone's funded, but that means there's at least sort of several stages of a company. One of which is the really hard one to think of what you're describing here, which is before we are funded, before anybody has any money, we might need to actually pay money to make this thing go because there's AWS bills and
Yeah.
like marketing, a little
And
bit of
and most
marketing.
VCs have a negative connotation if you like have a full-time job. Even you work at Amazon 40 hours a week and working your startup 40 hours a week, they still have a negative connotation because you're not all in.
Yeah, no, this is genuinely tough. And uh maybe this is part of the reason why people say if you've been a CEO before. This actually just occurred to me. Possibly this is part of the reason because I feel this pain too. Um, if you've been funded, um, the common wisdom is, look, you're not going to make what you would make at Google. You're not going to even make what you would make at sort of a mid-sized company. You're basically going to make an okay paycheck, and then you get the lottery ticket, which is a piece of equity, and you hope that this is the right one, and then statistically, you do like 7 or 8 of these in your career, and one of them is the one, and it blows up, and you get like a couple $1 million off of it. It pays for all of your not quite working at Googleness, or it doesn't, and that never happens, or it happens 3 times, and you're glad that you did that. But before you're funded, um, I see a lot of people really struggling with this. You have all kinds of weird make do situations where it's like, well, have someone who's going to be the CTO, but that person's got a day job doing engineering right now, so we're doing it kind of nights and weekends. And once we get funded, then that person is going to step out of what they're doing now and into being the CTO here. But they kind of can't do it until we're funded, but we only get funded by them doing enough prototyping and MVP work that people start to take interest. So it's an incredible strain. And but if you have won once, if you were a CEO in a company that got a real exit, you're probably not nearly as concerned about paychecks and money as everybody else. Um, so that the kind of, well, were you a CEO or a CTO at a company that did actually get a successful exit? Did you own like ultimately 10% of a company that sold for $1 billion? And now, what do you think? You're going to draw a paycheck? No, you're just going to do whatever your next thing is, and you're going to pour heart and soul into it. And I kind of wonder if part of the have you been a CEO before is that, you know, if you don't really need to worry about paying the mortgage, are you now that much more able to throw yourself just completely into this thing? The answer is probably yes. And that's a really unfortunate answer because it's just like, it makes for a sort of unlevel playing field.
Yeah, it definitely knocks a lot of people off the playing field, so to speak, right?
Yeah, no, this is tough for me. I mean, I'm still very much need to pay a mortgage and get a paycheck and so forth. And so as a result, there are some things um, that I kind of left on the drawing room floor, even though I'd very much like to do them, that are related to the world that I'm in, that probably are going to be some kind of future goal. And but I can't just, not only am I, not only am I not going to get paid for a year and a half for a shot at maybe getting paid, I'm also going to pay for all of these resources and infrastructure for that year and a half. And you look at the burn rate and you're just like, no, that's impossible. So
Yeah. I definitely think it's definitely more of a challenge for a non-tech founder. If you're a non-tech founder, right, really can't afford to hire anyone from Amazon. You can't afford that, right? And the people you can afford, they're right out of boot camp or like internships, and they probably don't have the knowledge that what you need, right? So it's a tough thing. And then like you're not a tech founder, you're like, okay, let me suck it up and learn how to code myself. That's probably not your, forte or skill set, right? So it's yeah.
yeah. And in particular where I think honestly, the modern move towards generative AI is going to help this somewhat. But yeah, there's absolutely sometimes you end up just taking like little pieces of a problem just because you can and you kind of want friends to win. Um, Aaron with working on Cheeky, I wrote I wrote a number of the AI pieces of that, and among other things, he keeps telling me that people who go to Cheeky say like, "Well, I put my resume in, and it's your extraction technique is like better than LinkedIn." um, and I'm very
I mean, being honest, that's not really saying much.
well. To be fair, yeah, I have tried it on LinkedIn, and it isn't. But the fact that the fact that I just happened to be working in like prompt chaining and kind of at the edge of like LLM research, so we could do these sort of like extractions that made sense and put them where they should go, and sort of have double checks to make sure that something didn't go wrong, and all these pieces that you would do um, is really in that product just because I want Aaron to win, like, and it's that's random, right? He just happened to know somebody with like that specific area of expertise. And I don't know. It feels like there was a very there's a very difficult situation kind of at the, bootstrapping end of funding where you're just doing it yourself. You're asking friends, you're like taking your savings and borrowing from family and everything else to make this dream go. There's just a lot simpler for anyone who has slightly deeper pockets. And that's a tough reality. I don't have an answer to it, but it's maybe good to be aware of it.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the gamma ray telescope you worked on.
Mm.
Is that still in space? Is NASA still using this telescope?
I think so. I haven't checked on it for a little while, and I think it was 2007, 2008. Now I feel dumb because I'll be wrong by a few years. I'll have to go check. But I think let's see if it's it has to be getting close to the end of its lifespan now. I should check. We could check while we're here if you want, but like I
Okay.
actually am not sure if it's still its predecessor was an experiment called EGRET, which an acronym which I do not remember. And it was substantially better than EGRET for gamma ray detection. But I think we were going to basically increase the number of X-ray and the number of gamma ray objects that we expected to know about by at least an order of magnitude, and I think that happened. Again, I'm throwing out numbers like I when I actually worked on this, it was whatever 20 years ago, so
Yeah.
it's been a
Understood.
while. But I hope I'm not totally wrong about
So
that.
next, talk about this Monte Carlo particle transport
Mm,
thing you did.
mm. Yeah. So when I said that I did sort of simulations and then optimizations, MCNP is a piece of software that does particle transport, and what I mean by that is you sort of make a CAD description of a thing. Um, so, for example, I made these literally with like a pair of calipers and like measuring tape, made these agonizingly specific um, measurements and models of like some vehicles and stuff that were pertinent. Hey, what's a standard truck? Okay, well, it's like this, and so um, the idea was to simulate all these sort of scenarios of interest. And I have to tiptoe around that. there's some sensitivity there. But the idea being that if we were going to make a detector work, we might say, well, how many, how much detector material actually has to be in here and how much shielding should be where. And so you'd kind of take all of your options and form them into a space of possible options. And then you simulate like at a grid in that space and see where you got the best performance and say, yep, okay, we need this much detector and that much shielding. That's the best performance we can get. So MCMP itself was just a radiation transport code that worked on the particle level. Actually, it was thinking about that convinced me about the sort of universe simulation theory. This idea, because particle transport's really expensive. Um, Maybe I shouldn't dive right into that, but particle transport simulation is really expensive. So one of the first papers I ever wrote was how to do this on random PCs that you stole from your coworkers. I didn't call it that, but that was exactly what happened. Everyone was getting rid of these old PCs, and I was a postdoc when I started this work, so like that was all I could get. People were throwing them away, and I went, no, 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 no. Let me have that via the cross requisition form. And it was this form that let me get everybody's. So I had like my office was always so hot. I had like 20 of these like stolen computers basically from other people that were all a generation back and all different stuff. And so I had to make um I basically made a thing using the multiprocessor libraries of the day, um, OpenMP and MPI, if it matters, to make a system that would dole out an appropriate number of particles to each one of those computers so that they would all kind of be done at the same time. And they could like come back and do what they call rendezvous, where they would dump all their data to one spot. So like basically that was the thing. The simulation is very open ended, and we did a lot of different stuff then. Um, but particle simulation itself is really expensive because you basically have to do the term Monte Carlo simulation is basically what happens when you say, I am going to imagine a thing, whatever, a car driving into a pole, or a radioactive decay happening and shooting a gamma particle off in some direction, or whatever it is. And then essentially you simulate all the physics with statistical understanding since then. So I'm like, well, there's a gamma ray and it shoots into a wall. Okay, well, what happens? Well, at some point it's going to hit something in that wall. It's a gamma ray, so it can go a fair ways, right? But at some point it's going to hit like a nucleus or an atom and do something. There's a couple ways it could like scatter or be absorbed, but so you sort of roll dice for when it gets absorbed and how it gets absorbed and so forth. And that's your one history. And then you start it again. You roll different dice. And you do this so many times that you build up whatever you're looking for. And it turns out that's just really computationally intensive, which is in a semi-jokey way why I was convinced of simulation theory a long time ago. That because if you made a simulation, you would definitely use um, like fluid dynamics whenever you could. And it would only matter if you were looking intensely at the thing that you would use particle dynamics because they're very expensive. And because the universe, via quantum mechanics seems to actually work that way, it's evidence that, if you wrote a simulation, there's just no way you would do particle transfer for everything. It would take way too long. And no matter how fast of a computer you have, that will hold. Like you'd always rather use fluid and general dynamics where it doesn't matter and where you could look at it later and decide. It's just it parallels the collapse of the wave function in quantum mechanics so well that I was somewhat convinced.
So with all these particles moving around, like how do we measure? Is like a certain tool that is it like a standard tool? All people like this or two have to use to measure it, or like different countries just do different tools? Like is like some kind of standard for this?
Oh, you mean for the simulation and,
Yeah.
and um so I think across radiation physics, there's a bunch of units that you use, um, Rankins and REMs and so forth that have to do with dose normally. But for detectors, uh, very normally, what will really happen, what comes off of a detector is more like a number of counts in a second or a number of counts in a time window. So the simulations that I did tended to end there. It'd be like, well, this detector will tell me every time a photon hits it, and it'll tell me the energy of that photon within an uncertainty of a certain percent. And so we'd kind of simulate, again, using Monte Carlo, we'd sort of simulate what would come off of the detector, and it was that sort of defined the answer.
And what's like the small? I know back in the day, the smallest thing was atom, right? Then that broken down. Like right now, what's like the smallest piece of organism matter that we know about that we be able to either see or we think we see?
I may not get this wrong. I think it's still quarks and gluons might be the smallest thing
Okay,
that you have.
and you have to use like some kind of powerful microscope to see those, right?
Well, you can't. You basically at this point we see things that are that small, unless let me not get this wrong. I seem like a terrible physicist. Um, but I believe at this point we're still we basically believe that some of these things exist. You can't. There are principles by which you can't see like one quark at a time, but you can kind of see the transition between maybe a charged particle and a non-charged particle that both have the same mass. So essentially, most of these things are resolved by really high energy colliders, where you sort of, whatever it is. I take protons and I accelerate protons really fast in a ring, and then I smack them into something dense. And I basically go, okay, I will simulate this according to the standard physics model. Um, and if the standard physics model holds, I expect this many, protons to just make it through, this many to just deposit all their energy, and um, and essentially be absorbed by some attendant molecule or whatever. This many to like turn into neutrons and give off a neutrino, and whatever, all the things that you basically think might happen, and then you find a way to track the stuff that you can that comes off that, which normally is a bunch of interleaved like silicon strips, where if a charged thing goes zipping through them, it induces a little bit of current, and so you can tell that it went there. And then really elaborate code to reconstruct where we think all those tracks went. And then much like a Monte Carlo simulation, we actually do it a bunch of times. You throw all your, protons in and watch them all sort of scatter and splatter off. And you look at all the reconstructed events that came off, because all of them happen quite quickly. So you look at all the reconstructed events and essentially count them up and make your various calculations where you say, all right, I think physics works this way. It's the scattering cross section of that against this was this. So I expect this many, protons and like this many production events and so forth. And you count them all up and basically say, is this correct? And then people sort of navel gaze at that data and say, if there is an extra thing that violates what we understand now, it will look like, an extra peak. There'll be more, there'll be more like protons that made it all the way through than we think and ended up catching them. I don't know if that's adequate or not. I guess that's just um,
So a lot of stuff right now is based on the law of physics, right?
hmm.
I could be wrong, but everything based on law of physics. But there's a lot of theories out there that cannot be proven or disproved. It's like I won't say best guess, but best guess, right? Like how much of stuff that scientists put out as being like true or factual is actually based on like a theory that they can't prove yet.
Oh gosh. And again, I'm gonna drop the ball because I can't remember. I know that they were looking um, for a long while for evidence of the Higgs boson, which essentially is where we think the fundamental mass charge comes from. And I think, let me not be wrong about this. We should probably look it up while we're sitting here. I don't remember if there is sufficient evidence to believe in it. I think there is. There's other stuff. There's dark matter slash dark
Yeah, dark
energy.
matter. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which I have like a running bet with somebody that there is no dark matter. And I haven't looked into it again for
Does,
almost a decade at this
so does
point.
it really make a big difference? Like if it exists or doesn't exist? Like does everyday life
Yeah.
really change? Like does the universe disappear or some theory gets disproven? It's like it's one or the other.
Yeah, it kind of has to be something. So what happens is cosmology is a weird beast. Um, Essentially there are, our understanding of the Big Bang and the birth of the universe and all of this stuff is that there are a bunch of weird things that we sort of wave hands at, where you say, all right, well, there was a period where the universe seemed to expand faster than the speed of light. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but here we are, and like everything else holds together. You just kind of assume that. And, at the moment, if you look at the relative motion of all the stars and galaxies, they seem to be, it seems to be like there's this missing mass where you'd have to add this mass for the motion that we have to make any kind of sense. And so they sort of went looking for it. And when I was in grad school, I think they thought it was like the mass of one of the neutrinos was all the missing mass. It turned out to not be the case. And um, oh, I'm trying to remember. There's a number of candidates that keep getting knocked down. And so help me if there was one that was proven to be it. It's not my fault. I haven't looked at it in a while. But but again, that's to resolve a fundamental conflict, which is if I look at all the luminous matter, what I think is all the non-luminous matter in the universe, and then I look at the like accelerate relative acceleration of everything, it looks like there's missing stuff. And it could be a lot of things. Um, if I pick something out of the hat, I say, no, it's not missing matter. It's a second order term in the gravitational or something. It's like, well, there's a there's another term where gravity isn't just like one over r squared, and it doesn't just pull like that. There's also a really long range one that only sort of turns on at a really gigantic distance, um, and that has to be added into, and that would fix it as well. And so people would say, like, that's a very classic physics thing to do. Somebody goes, yeah, my cosmology is broken. All the relative motions of things aren't quite right. And I don't know what would make that happen. And a theorist will go, I know. If I added another thing onto gravity that basically turns on at a long distance, maybe that would fix it. And then that becomes a standing hypothesis until somebody knocks it down. They go, okay, well, how are we going to test that? Um, and the answer is probably a bunch of like relative analyses of distant points or whatever and how they're moving relative to one another. I don't know if that one's actually been knocked down or not. But that's the sort of thing that happens is basically somebody goes, yep, we're done. Physics is done. Nope. Oh, wait. Something's weird and it doesn't really line up. And this happened with a standard model of physics, that standard, quarks and gluons uh, and all of that, for a while we thought physics was just done because every kind of one of these calculations where you go and look at reactor or scattering outputs would just be perfectly correct. And so for a genuinely, and I don't quote me on this, but I think maybe 40 years or something, we just assumed that sort of physics was over. We found the last thing, we're done. And then people started to find violations of it. I think somebody just found a violation of the magnetic moment of the muon, very small but present, and they had to look for a very long time to see it. But it suggests there's more than the standard model. There really are other forces out. There's either other forces out there or there are small deviations that we didn't expect. And so that back and forth, thing is done, wait, thing is a little bit violated. Okay, why could that be? And theorists kind of go, well, what if there was an extra particle? What if there was a different force? Well, what if there was a different like strength to this force? Okay, well, what if only under these conditions this thing happens? And then, they sort of pile off all of these like plausible theories that would explain all the data we have. And then they have to go figure out what to do to then separate. They say, well, you said there was another particle. Okay. If there was another particle, what would it have to be like? Have to be like this. Okay, we'll go look. Just go look and see if we can find that particle. And if we can't, then we throw that one out. And people kind of do this over the course of a whole career. And so as a result, things move, but they kind of move quite slowly, but carefully. So I have a running bet that eventually instead of dark matter, it will be another force or an extra term on an existing force.
What does the winner of the bet get? What does the winner of the bet get?
It was like $10. It was not. It was not. It was
like
not.
Bet.
Yeah, it was non-interesting.
So next question. Since beginning of time, the smartest people around have always been proven wrong. Like, back in the day, all the smartest people thought the world was flat. Of course, that's wrong. Back in the day, smartest people in the world thought, the universe revolved around the earth. The question is, what is like most people take as like ground truth today? Everyone says this is correct that you think is actually wrong. It's going to be proven wrong in the future.
Oh gosh. So like I said, I think I'm a believer sort of in simulation theory because of that. If you did make a simulation, I made a lot of simulations. So, if you did make a simulation,
I mean, you can't prove it's wrong or right, can you?
I can't, but there are suggestive elements. And one of them is if I were to make a simulation, I would do two things for sure. I would use fluid dynamics everywhere that any kind of conscious observer wasn't. And B, I would make there to be sort of a fundamental pixel size so that even if we were called upon to look further and further and further and further, at some point you would find the limit of the floating point, uh, the floating point resolution. And both of those seem to be actual in the real universe. So I'm not saying that happens, but that's a possibility. For the record, I don't care. Like, I mean, I care, but I don't care. I don't feel like it makes the idea of consciousness less relevant. That I think all the arguments for consciousness are still the case, even if technically the universe is simulated. Um, and that raises the question of consciousness. Oh, also, a thing that I think people are concerned about that hasn't happened yet is conscious AI. So this happened once with convolutional neural nets, and it's happening again with generative textual AI. Um, Basically, we made systems that mimic parts of your own neuronal system. So the convolutional neural net essentially is a system of neural net layers where each of them expects to take parts of an image and sort of abstract them into how much they look like a filter. And then this happens in several layers, so it's a highly abstract thing that comes out the other end, but it sort of has meaningful connection to what was in the image. And because of that, we were able to do all of this wonderful new computer vision stuff that was just impossible before that, or you know, super specific and difficult. And people were a little bit freaked out. They're like, computers can make decisions based on looking at a thing, and that feels human. And that feels like there's no way to do that without being human. But eventually, people kind of settled down and went, no, what we've built is basically an eye. Now we have an eye that we can command. Um, and it can do things like tell you what is a dog and what is not a dog. And so that was useful, but it didn't add up to like a conscious system. And this is happening again, where basically we're generating a speech center. Fundamentally, all these algorithms are still trained on an input and an expected set of output. So it's still really a machine learning system. And what it's doing is predicting what a human would say next. On a fundamental level, that's a lot like a speech center of your brain. It's a part of the ability to have actual consciousness and self-awareness, but it doesn't by itself constitute that. Um, I mean, it's evidenced by weird, well, again, somebody who knows neuroscience better than me should probably correct me on this, but it seems to me that there's a lot of those systems where, people will talk in their sleep or just randomly if they're just waking up, that sort of thing. And I'm unclear whether or not that is simply a speech center disconnected from some conscious awareness, just sort of freewheeling. Um, anyway, so that's another thing that I think I understand how to get to conscious AI, but I don't think where we're going right now will do it. So I'm less concerned about that than others.
Do you see a future like way down the road where we have like AI conscious robots like voting and being like full fledged citizens with equal rights and stuff like that?
This is really tough. The cynical answer is somebody said, well, at what point do we have to give AI rights? And I'm like, well, we're not great at giving like all the people rights, so it's probably going to be a while. That's a horrible answer. I think hopefully, I at least think there are way better philosophers than me, but I at least think that it is something intrinsic about the model of the self and the internal model of the self and the internal model of the universe containing the self, which has an internal model of the universe containing the self, and so on. That is the seat of at least functional consciousness. So if those things that we take to be fundamentally human, like the drive to live and to understand and so forth, become the driving forces of like the training function of a larger AI system, that will allow the natural best adaptation to be an intrinsic map, an intrinsic internal model of the self. Like basically a latent internal model of the self will develop when there's enough space for it and a need for it because the system itself like wants to survive and reproduce and understand. If we put those needs in as the training function on top of a driver system, my suspicion is that we'll be eventually able to develop consciousness. I'm really concerned about having said that. because I think that's how it happens. And I don't know if we want to do that or not. Like, that's a really open question. I think that's how it would happen. And if it does, then it feels like we're out of reasons to not consider a machine conscious and alive. But we don't have to do that. It's a heavy conversation. Like, I'm concerned we're just not going to have that conversation. We'll instead just do it and have to deal with the consequences.
So there's of course a lot of concern with AI, ML, machine learning, all that kind of stuff, like impact society. My thing is like, how do we make sure that people coding this stuff is like all ethically, morally, correct people, right? Is it like, are like, is that kind of standard out there, some like certification, like can like you just learn how to code and like you might be a bad person and put like biases and stuff. Like, how do we stop that, or is it like, or can we stop it?
I think we can. We need more. We need. I was going to say we need more discussion around this. We need more careful discussion around this. It's easy to go either direction. Say, nah, don't worry about it. It's just a system. It'll do its best. We'll work with it. It's like any other thing. Or like we really need to like put, we really need to put external, guidelines on this, even though those guidelines might not be aware of the way that the systems really operate. Um, there there are some errors that are just straight screw ups. Like nobody tried to do them. It happened because we screwed up and we didn't think about it. Like the classic thing where, well, I want to make a face recognition algorithm. What do I have? Well, I'll just pull the first 10,000 faces I get off of Google. Oh, it turns out that's not really evenly distributed among the population. So there's some people that were really good at finding and some people that were very bad at finding, for better or worse. Now we have an unequal thing. And no one wants to do that one, right? So like you just like stop screwing up. You basically figure out that this happens. And one of the ways that you do this is to say, all right, in the end, I have a set of people that does represent basically everyone. Uh, the system needs to do well in all of them. And if it doesn't, it's going back until it does. Um, and that is the basis, I think, of what we ought to do. Because it's really difficult to assign strict human-like rules. In fact, we gave up a lot of that for the modern AI era. What we can do is give a lot of things by example, and it's those sets of examples and validation sets that we need to be talking about. So, like everyone thinks in terms of Asimov's laws. I go to sci-fi cons and I talk, these subjects all the time, and everyone is still convinced that Asimov's laws sort of are in effect. But those were from a time when we thought that consciousness was sort of going to be a series of trees of like yes no decisions that eventually led to an outcome or a decision. And so as a result, something very specific like don't do this ever would work. In the modern system, almost all of the basically all of the behavior sets is a set of matrix multiplications where you only have maybe input of what you're seeing right now and input of the history that's happened before, and you have to make a decision like a self-driving car or something. And fundamentally, there's no way to tell it you have now hurt a person except to simulate this a million times and have a strong negative happen when you hit a person. But so as a result, you cannot train one of these and then say, under all conditions in the future, it will never hit a person or never make the decision to hit a person. You instead have to have really strong challenge sets where people are in there and it fails if it hits any people. Um, Even at that, that probably just makes it human and hopefully superhuman, especially talking about something that could hurt people. Um, but it's tough because that conversation is hard to start to say, like, oh, no, I know what you're saying. You want it to never decide to like hit somebody because that would hurt somebody, but it doesn't have an understanding of what hurting people is. And it can only have an understanding if essentially you give it loads of examples of that happening or loads of situations in which it could happen and reward it for having that not happen. But that means some very difficult things like it wants to get to the proper place in a reasonable amount of time. So it wants to drive according to the rules of the road, but also fairly, as quickly as it can. But it also doesn't want to hit anybody. And neither of those things can be zero or infinity. The knee-jerk response is to say, if it hits somebody, it's like negative infinity. But it tends to break the algorithm because if you really do that, it'll say, okay, well, negative infinity is bigger than anything else, so I will never move again.
Let me ask you this real fast.
Yeah.
Suppose it says not to hurt anyone, right? But it sees a human riding a bicycle and it says, okay, it's a human, but it's on a bicycle. If I hit it, I'm hurting the bicycle, not the human.
Well, but see, that's the thing. At least for the moment, it doesn't really reason in that way.
Okay.
The fact is that we've made, the internal guts of it are essentially a little bit difficult to assay. And so we've made a thing that does a really good job at like not hitting people, and it's never seen a bicycle before. At that moment, if we do it or we simulate it, we kind of don't know what it will do. Because what we know that it is not doing is saying, aha, I have recognized a person, but it is on a bicycle. And this is and this combination of things, I need to figure out what to call it. Is that a person or is that a bicycle? We could probably at this point make systems that do that. But at least up until this point, they've instead just been, instead the thing will do whatever it does, which we sort of don't know because there haven't been any examples yet. And so that's the importance of when you said like basically, can we make sure these things are doing what we want and they're not nefarious or like heavily biased? We essentially need really big example test sets and really big challenge sets. And those things we should fight over intensely. But it's difficult because if it were humans, we want to just write this stuff in words and have it be absolute. Like, don't murder anybody. Yeah, we all know what that is. Yeah, even if you murder a person who's on a bicycle, yeah, that's still murdering somebody. So don't do it. And you can tell a human being that, and we are sophisticated enough to go like, yeah, they meant even if they're on a bike. Yeah, even if they're in a hot air balloon, still don't murder somebody. Um, but the system basically needs to be shown people in a hot air balloon so that we can be 100% sure that it will still not murder them. And the number of scenarios that that encompasses is very big. So basically, anyway, that's at least my conclusion. The idea of model validation out of sample sets where we challenge them very hard, where it's like you can't train on this set. This is all the people on bicycles and in hot air balloons. You can put people on bicycles and hot air balloons in your set when you train it also, but like these are special. You can't cheat and like look at the test answers first. We're going to give you a bunch of challenges and you need to pass that to come out and be, embodied in the world. Like to the AI system, like you have to pass all of these. If you hit the person on the bike, it's still fail. You got to go back and we have to train you harder and for more things. Um, and if that were the conversation, and I hope it becomes it, I think we're going to do okay with those sorts of
So I want to give you a chance to brag about yourself real fast.
systems.
Talk about something that you've done a lot of great things in your career. Talk about something you accomplished that you're really proud of.
Oh gosh, this is a question of picking something. What do I really like? Oh, so there was someone when I was at Pioneer Square Labs who came in who wanted to be uh, a CEO of a new company, but he didn't really know how he was going to make that company technologically. He said, "I've been a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, for like the bulk of my career at this point, and there's a terrible problem that everybody has, and it is um, that closing the books out at the end of the month. And this would seem easy. You just need to say like, well, here's our point of sale record and here's our bank record. But sometimes it's like, what if somebody bought a thing, returned it for store credit, then bought another thing with the store credit? Now you have three point of sales and like one, daily bank record or like a bank correction. So there's all these very complex things. And at best, the best software anyone has made will do maybe 60% of these, the easy 60%. And so there are people just stuffed into offices, having to, go cross-eyed at spreadsheets all day. And that's basically their job is like have to like collect all the books up. So what do we do? And I remember vividly, I went away for a weekend. And for the first day or two, I actually just wasn't sure how to do this. I'm like, well, maybe we can do procedural stuff. Maybe we can work at it. And then it occurred to me, if there was a solution, a set of rules, like procedural rules, by which you could answer this question, they must conform to a limited set of to a limited set of symbolic representation. So basically, like I would say the sum of, if there's ever going to be a match, the sum of the stuff on this side has to equal the sum of the stuff on this side in terms of price. And also, if there's ever going to be a match, then all of this UID number has to equal all of this UID number. And, whatever that magic resolvey set of rules is, it has to live in a limited symbolic space. And if that's true, then I can call it the answer to a machine learning question, which we can then train based on the data. And we made it work. And we went from like 60%, which was the best tech on the market, to like 95 in a week. I was so happy about that. That ended up becoming a company. It was called Sigma IQ, and that system worked. So it was just off the wall. I sometimes have a hard time characterizing that because it was sort of supervised machine learning, and it was sort of just random skunkworks thinking, and it was sort of applied statistics, and it was sort of symbolic reasoning. We just kind of threw it together, and that, I don't know. It means that this is why working at the early stage is great. This is the sort of thing that it's very difficult to make fly at large organizations. When you get to wear a lot of hats, especially in the early stage, risks are high. It also means that the acceptance of unusual approaches is very high, and sometimes you just hit one, and it works like that. So I was very happy about that one.
So, from your point of view, is there any part of society, any kind of a business or anything that will not be affected by AI, or AI is going to be like, I joke around like it's easier to raise if you want to raise a VC fund around, just say your food truck to AI, right? Like
It's
AI, I know AI is in farming, ranching, different things. Like, is there any part of society you think would not be affected by AI?
it's genuinely hard to think of one if there is. I mean, this is if this were 2000 and no, this were 2000 or 1999. You asked me this about like internet and code. I would say probably not. Like, sure, there'll be some. No, no, I was about to say, well, maybe if you're making wine in a classic way, and but no, you still have like all these, online systems that are helping you, all this like online delivery, logistics. It's hard for me to imagine. I feel like this is about as big as that. Like if or if you said the cloud, if this is when would that be? This is like 2009 or something, and you're like, this thing, the cloud, is there anybody who's gonna be untouched by it? I'll say there will be a lot of people who aren't directly touched by it, in that they're not sitting there like writing cloud infrastructure. And in this case, they're not sitting there like interfacing directly with an AI all the time. Um, but the underlying pieces, people had stuff they wanted to get done. And the enablement that they now have, at least in principle, based on the technology, is probably going to be pretty total. So I bet it's everywhere.
Yeah, because right now I'm raising like a PC round for own startup, and of course you have a research VCs, whatever. I came across one startup. Basically, what they did, they help ranchers predict like future, output of milk from cows,
Mhm.
all this different scientific stuff. Like, man, this is like if ranchers are doing it, it's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we might not call it what we're calling it now. We're about to enter, I think, the end of the hype wave for some of this stuff, and the reason is because it's a little bit overbought. So, um, to put that more bluntly, a bunch of people are right now starting AI systems that probably won't work, and the reason is because the underpinnings are going to be harder than they think. So, very commonly at this point, right, one of the ways to get money is just to go, hey, I'm going to use AI, basically the modern LLM, to like
Yeah,
teach your kids and say whether or not you should go to oncology or
and,
not.
and change
And
instead of being like www um, blank.com, make it www.blank.ai.
yeah, just the kind of,
It
kind
doesn't
of,
really mean your AI come just because you have AI across your name thing.
yeah, or like, solve your, organize your calendar and buy you airline tickets and everything else. And the fact is that while the technology is quite good, it's still a little bit janky unless you really have a lot of containment for it. And there's a lot of techniques for this. I don't think we have time to probably get into, but like retrieval augmented generation and iterative like prompt chaining and like double checking and like tripwires and um, memory structures and so forth. There are all these, things that the state of the art and the intersection of data science and engineering is doing to sort of make it good. But yeah, if you say, hey, I'm going to review your entire medical record and say whether or not you might have cancer and we should look at that, that thing could never be wrong. It can't be wrong even once. And right now it's going to be wrong a lot. And there are people, I think, without naming any names, there are definitely people out there right now who have sold that idea, whatever it is, pick one of those, who their current technological stack is going to look like, well, ChatGPT, and then that's it. I'll just tell ChatGPT all the stuff we know, and then I'll ask it a question. And it's not nearly good enough for something like that. And there are ways to do it, but it's hard enough that a bunch of people are going to start running and just fall immediately. And it's going to get a black eye because of this. Venture capitalists, I think, will recoil in about 9 months from now. Don't put that completely in stone, but somewhere in there, there's going to be a pullback where people go, oh dear. Just saying you're going to use AI, it turns out was not a good bet. You couldn't just make that your entire pitch.
And actually, AI companies, they actually use a whole lot of computing power, right?
Oh yeah, no, there's a bunch of very interesting techniques that come off of this. I mean, all the similarities and embeddings. And again, I'm happy to dig into any of that if you like. But all of these things are real and they're powerful and they're like highly empowering to additional technologies or additional things that we would have had a hard time doing right now otherwise. Um, but it's the classic 95% problem that if you can make a system that's right 95% of the time, for a few things that's okay, but often not at all. It's like, imagine a thing that manages your calendar and like puts all your stuff in order and it's right 95% of the time. So 1 in 20, you miss a meeting or the thing just doesn't happen. That's not nearly good enough, right? That means every week or something falls completely through and you have to apologize. Like, no, you're not going to use that. And that's still 95% good. So essentially, I don't know. I think from a funding perspective, people are going to expect a lot more bona fides, and maybe that will require a change of language because it tends to. We'll see. We'll see. I could be wrong. My suspicion is the hype wave is about cresting right now, and so, but you see the winners on the way down, right? They basically a bunch of people will pull out to stop funding so many people, but then we'll figure out who really had it where it counts. In 2 years or something, you actually will have a couple of products that really do the trick. Everyone uses them and they're fine. We'll just figure out who those winners are. So I don't think that's necessarily bad, but this is also why, startups are a bloodbath all the time.
Yeah.
It's why you always have to, maybe assume that things are going down unless they really prove out.
So this one you might not be able to talk about. If you can't, it's fine. So you recently a startup that didn't make it, right? Can you talk about why that startup didn't make it?
Um, I want to tiptoe around this a little bit.
Okay.
Um,
Like we can skip if you want to.
well, I think the very basic answer is with a sort of well, maybe I can go more global with this. So with the current state of sort of macroeconomics, um, interest rates rose. All of a sudden, money became expensive. Became difficult to like just borrow more. And so this idea of let us stretch our expenses and let us stretch our expenses and see what pays off because the thing that pays off will pay for all of this because the interest is low and so forth. That everybody was sort of doing this, and when that changed, it became very hard on vendors. So anyone doing like a B2B thing, all of a sudden felt this incredible chop in the waters as people went, yeah, well, could we just divest? Could we just not have this? Could we just not pay these people? That would help us. Um, and we were still doing all right. This is also my conjecture. Like,
And how
quick,
long did the
yeah.
startup last? How long were you in business, so to speak?
Oh, I think I was there for a couple of years, and they
Okay.
were there for longer than that. So I want to say like maybe 4 years,
Okay. So not like you
longer.
started and 3 months later you shut it down.
Yeah,
It was
no,
going to hold on for a little bit.
yeah, I was definitely there for a while, and frankly, I think they had a great product, and that it worked and it did what it wanted, or it did what it was supposed to do well, and everybody liked it. It's just we entered into again my view. We entered into a market that was like really hostile just at the time where we needed to hit like high growth. And so it was a poor match. That sort of thing happens all the time. Like often this is
Yeah.
hidden
I mean,
under
time
yeah.
is a big thing with startup success, right? People don't talk about that enough. I think like the start time means a lot with it.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because in the dramatizations, the story is like, oh, the CEO was terrible and they like torpedoed this thing and then everything fell apart and they made bad decisions. But no, no. Everybody there was great. CEO is fantastic. Um, I don't think any wrong decisions were made. I think literally product market fit just kind of started to slip, and it wasn't really anyone there's fault. Um, which is sad. It's tough because if you stick around in startup land, you're gonna see a bunch of those happen, and you'll just go, "Well, nobody's fault. We just rolled the dice wrong."
Yeah.
And
I've seen, I was a startup like that before when I first got into overall tech. Like, just, I mean, everything was there, right? And didn't make
mm,
it right. I know other friends, I mean, perfect team, everything perfect. I funding this like like what happened, right? How did we fail? Like, but it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, no, that happens a lot. Or like for example, I think it will be again, like I said, maybe 9 months. I mean, don't let me not be wrong about this because I just threw out an actual number. But sometime in there, it's going to be like a lot harder to fund a business that is predominantly just an AI thing, unless you have a very dramatic differentiator. Oh, there's another thing. Differentiator is another thing that you sort of need to come equipped with. Explain why you're different and or what sort of moat you have where other people couldn't just do it.
Or why Google's not going to do this?
Yeah, why Google's not just going to do it in 5 minutes. I've certainly that happened too.
I mean, what's the answer to that, right? Like, what are you gonna say? Well, I mean, we're gonna be faster than them, or Google's not interested. Like, I mean, if Google, Amazon decides what you're doing, like, well, I remember the stop in Seattle where they were doing a calendar, and 6 months later, Google Calendar came out, and of course, data shut down.
Oh yeah, no, this has totally happened. I mean, retrieval augmented generation, probably one of the biggest stories. So okay, so really quick, um, the so large language models, right? Normally, ChatGPT, you put in so much text beforehand. This is getting bigger, but it's still limited. Um, you put in a bunch of text beforehand, and then you say, here is the context. It's these paragraphs. Here's the stuff that you know extra well. And then I'm going to ask this question, or I'm going to ask you to do a thing about it. Um, but what if you have all of Wikipedia, the entire works of Shakespeare, or something like that, and you want to ask questions of them, and the classic answer, which is classic answer, like it was long ago, right? This is like 18 months ago or something, that is still being developed, is a thing called retrieval augmented generation. The other the other thing that large language models have is a way for you to take any piece of text and cram it down into a relatively limited size vector, where similar texts go to similar vectors. And the reason why that's important is because you chunk up the entire works of William Shakespeare or all of Wikipedia or both into pieces, and you do that embedding and you put them all into like a vector database. And then when you ask your question, you put it in that same vector space and see which ones are like the closest nearest neighbors that seem, those are the things that sort of seem most relevant. You pull out as many of those as you can afford and make that the context. And this was way better than trying to guess or trying to use regular expressions to pull those pieces out or whatever. It's still not perfect, and there's been a lot of work um, on my part too to try and develop those techniques. But that was so hot and new that basically it meant, hey, do you have like all these corporate documents or all of your contracts or whatever? Why don't you just put them all in the hopper and then you can talk to them like they're a chatbot. If you ask questions, we'll figure out the appropriate bit, so, put that into like the context window, and then you can ask a question and almost certainly get the correct answer because now we have all the relevant pieces of text that sort of put in there. Um, so people started like rolling out tools and companies kind of based on that, and like a second later, it's now just a thing that's in it's in OpenAI's playbook, and so in some sense, I think there were a lot of hopes smashed on those rocks of like, this is a really good idea. It just happened. It's really smart. Let's do it. But then nothing was really going to stop the big players from just also doing it. It was a good idea. And it didn't take very long to implement. So they just kind of did it. And now it's not a thing you're probably going to go to a third party for. And I assume there will be more of those. And where the line is, where if your thing is good enough that like a Google or an OpenAI or whatever won't just do it, seems to be if you have some kind of a data moat. What I mean by that is like data that you have that no one else has. Sometimes it's literally bought. Like, well, I'm working with somebody that has access to this entire, expensive legal collection that they have rights to look at or something. Something like that that will work out legally in your favor is one way. Um, Another is if you really think you have something that's groundbreaking and you can bring it out fast enough that when it comes time to make the decision, instead Google tries to buy you or use you. So that's the other classic answer is, well, all right, but Google hasn't thought of this. This is really our thing. We're new. And by the time we get this out, um, yeah, but the big players will essentially make that buy versus build decision and say, yeah, we need to put 20 people on this for 4 months, 6 months to make it happen. It's actually cheaper to just either buy the company or become a customer of the company. And sometimes that happens. That's like, one of the big sort of success stories that tends to happen.
Let me ask you this: like, suppose how do we fix this or make it equal, or equal opportunity, or maybe you don't, right? So suppose you're in Seattle, you're a kid in Seattle, right? Suppose you're 13, 40 years in Seattle.
Mm.
Even you live like a disadvantaged neighborhood, right? You still have access to all this stuff, right? But then suppose a 14-year-old kid is in like, small town Iowa with 300 people and there's a bunch of farms, right? And there's like no tech, right? Like, how do we make the playing field equal? Or is this the way it is, Like,
Yeah, this is another one of those painful things. I mean, I want to say, and I got to think about this. If you plot the trajectory of like tech access, it seems to look better with time. I mean, so what I was about to say, is I thought you were saying, well, you're a kid in the city, you don't have a lot, but maybe you have access to like maybe you have a phone and you have access
and
to
you
like
say you have access to, you got all these meetups, all these tech things going on, like
yeah,
you can catch the bus from somewhere to like, a meetup or gaming stuff,
yeah. And I was about to say, well, the nice thing is that it's made a lot of things easier to easier to jump into. Like for example, while it is not perfect code, um, ChatGPT and the GPT series or the other ones, Llama derivatives, the other, Bard, etc., will write you code for things. And at the moment, it'll be kind of okay. Sometimes it won't work. Um, but it's a profound, it's the ability to jump right in with essentially a tutor that's kind of okay, as long as you understand that it's only sort of okay. So the wall that used to be up around, a kid who's going to say, I really want to learn something. Everybody says Python is great. I want to learn Python and start coding something, but I don't really know how to begin. Um, is at least not going to have to start on like a book and a tutorial and like Stack Overflow, which is a really hard road. At least they have sort of this extra thing. But the fact is that if you don't have access to that, there could be a relatively steep wall of capability. I mean, because if what I basically just motivated is this idea that almost no matter who you are, you kind of have a little tech knowledge of everything now because you have this thought partner that will help you along. That happened to me. I was so at web scraping, and I'm better now because I have this additional thing I can run everything by and be like, wait a minute, I wanted to add some piece. Um, that and code assistance. So things that I was good at, I'm still good at, but things that I was mediocre at, I'm kind of good at now also because of this. But if that's really the case, then there's this unscalable wall, isn't there? Like, and if I say, well, even if you have a little bit of interest in a little bit of tech, you're basically an okay engineer if you want to be. That's really new. But if you have no exposure to this at all, now what are you going to do? Like everyone in the world is an engineer if they want to be except you. I don't know what we do about that.
yeah, that's not a good place to be if you're that person, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. My understanding is at least in some places, and this is difficult because of how we fund education. Um, I know at least in some places they're attempting to get kind of low mid-level like tech into students' hands, even if they don't have it. So to wit, like Chromebooks and stuff that they sort of try and make part of people's education. This is really tough. I
That's definitely a hard problem that we got to solve, I think.
I was surprised. Oh, this is not having children myself. This was a thing that I unfortunately did not know into my 30s, which is an embarrassing thing to not know. But I didn't know that the way they funded schools was not collect all the money from the state, then dole it back out depending on how many kids there were. I just assumed that
Not
was.
at all.
I
Yeah.
was always
I
very
mean, that would make
confused.
better
Yeah.
sense, because, pull it all together because, society's kids, but it's not this property tax, So obviously, example I use, there's a neighborhood in Dallas called Highland Park, like $1 million homes.
Mhm.
And there's like Dallas, South Oak Cliff in southern Dallas is, like poor neighborhood, right? Of course, education standards like vastly different, even though it's technically the same city.
Yeah. No, that's nuts. Uh, it's one of those things that well, it speaks poorly to me because I didn't know because I didn't really look into it, but I would never have even imagined that that was the way we did
Yeah, I
that.
mean, you think that's the reason why people look for houses and they have young kids. They like school system is the biggest
Mhm.
thing, not the location or price of the house is like how the schools.
Yeah, I didn't even realize when I was young, I didn't understand people who I would meet who went to a good school. Schools I went to were fairly marginal, frankly. Um, and then I, met people or like had relationships with people who went, no, high school was great. I learned all this stuff. They had all these programs. Did How did that work? How did that happen? And I think
Yeah.
it was somewhere in there in like my early 30s. Somebody went, well, I mean, some schools have lots of money and some
Yeah.
have almost none. I'm like, how? Don't they just? No, they do
Yeah.
not.
And so there's a video on social media a month ago where these high school kids did a tour of the high school, right?
Yeah.
And then they had like, it was like a college, right? Like it was like a 50,000 foot football stadium, 10,000 foot basketball court. Like you mean like this is comparable with Duke University, right? Of course, they thought, but I was like, this is not a high school, right? Like this, our high school, we can't even like keep the lights on, So just a disparity, like this one high school, like all brand new MacBooks the students get to take home.
Mhm.
We have like, we have one Chromebook for 10 students, So just the disparity, and then people why all the unequal stuff is going on.
Yeah. I guess like if there's one thing that I would fix, maybe there are ways. It would be that I would want essentially the baseline platform and access capabilities to be in their hands no matter what.
Yeah.
At least you basically have some system with which you can interface with the internet and some
Yep.
access to the new stuff. And it is in some sense really great because on one hand the bar has kept going down if you have those things.
Yeah.
But it means that it means the playing field is like horrendously off balanced if you don't have those things. If like you do not have a way to have a keyboard and a screen that gets you into the
Yeah.
modern AI systems, then you're sliding back a year with every year, and everyone
Yeah.
else is like tinkering with
Like,
it and
yeah,
figuring it
like
out.
you're a high school student now, you have no access to a computer at home. Like, man, how do you even like do your homework? How do you like compete right without a basic computer at home?
This is super tough. If there's one thing where I think if I could only pick one thing that basically we would throw more funny, it's probably be that.
So moving on,
Mm.
can you talk about some of your mentors you've had through your career?
Yeah, yeah. So as I said, it was Professor John Abeley who I worked with in undergrad, um, and it just like encouraged me in every direction. He was awesome, and one of the things was the idea of automation of data collection, which really defined a lot of my later career. So I'm very glad that that was a thing, and he like trusted me as a kid. And when was I? When I actually met him, I would have been 16 or 17 in college, and I went a little bit early. Um, but he basically still trusted me to automate this lab where, that was burning a lot of expensive cryogens and working with a basically priceless, object and all these things that we had to do. Um, and I remember vividly, I wasn't sure if I was going to go to grad school because I was just taking the GRE then. Turned out I did go, but um, at the time I was just agonizing over like, well, I could go get a job. I've learned how to program here. Like I could go and like there's this new tech boom that's really happening. It's the end of the 90s. Like, should I do that instead? Should I take a few years? And he just listened to me with like this sort of, sage air to him. I must have done this for half an hour sitting in the lab, like tweaking stuff. Just, well, what if I do this? What would you do? Would you think that, would the paycheck be higher if I waited? And he just waited for like half an hour of this until I'd blown it all out. And he goes, John, like, it's obvious to me that what you're really looking for is happiness. And I went, yeah, no, I guess that's true. And I don't know why, but that has stuck with me to this day. Like, gonna be kind of, it's gonna be kind of difficult to tell from 1,000 yards where happiness is. But if you know you're kind of going for it, you should figure out what brings that to you and try and go after that. Anyway, so that became like one of my touchstones because I overthink everything and I overtalk everything. Hell. Um, yeah. Also, Professor Toby Burnett from the University of Washington, who was just fantastic, and again, like very, very encouraging in the direction of creativity mathematically, um, and of learning mathematically. And he did that great thing that your major professor, especially in grad school, is supposed to do, which is you'd go in to his office every week for like your formal interaction, and he would just absolutely beat everything you think you know to death. It was great. This is what should happen. A lot of physics is really complex, and so going in there and going, well, I read all these papers. Here's what I think. Here's what I think could happen. Here's how I understand this. And it's just like, no, well, I mean, you're right for about a third of that. You're right on. But because you think this, I want you to read this book and all of that stuff. I knew it was a lot of work. Professors who are great like that do this, and he did it really well. Um, Gosh, I guess there are definitely more. As if I could pick on a few more in from the venture world, somebody named T.A. McCann, who you might also know. He's
Yeah, I know who
well
that is.
known.
Yeah, I know who that
Um,
is.
just a force of nature. And he was sort of more formally my mentor for I think around a year, towards the end of my tenure at Pioneer Square Labs. And I don't know how to describe him other than that he's like the he's like the unstoppable force that you like want to have happen. I talk to him every time and do my normal. I'm spinning myself up. I'm overthinking it. I'm not sure which way to go. And he just go, well, you want this, right? Yeah. Well, then obviously you should go and try and get that. And again, I just go, well, yeah, no, you're right. And there is an obvious way, isn't there? And then I'd go and I'd push on that and I'd try and make it happen. Um, but I don't know what I assume about TA. He's a wonderful person.
He's still pretty involved with all the tech startup stuff, isn't he?
Oh yeah, very much, very
He's
much.
still at Pioneer Square Labs, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And that is,
I think he started it, didn't he?
uh,
I know. I think it was
don't quote
one.
me on this. It was definitely Greg Gottesman was definitely part of it, and I wanted to call him out too. He's a fantastic person. Um, Jeff Entrus, maybe, and I think TA also.
Okay, yeah,
But some people have come on board since, so I'm not 100% sure what
yeah.
the original team was. They had a hand in like Madrona as well, and yeah, and then like Greg Gottesman, also very much a mentor there, also very much like an incredible person. Um, he's kind of the image of the venture capitalist investor as somebody who shuts everything down is kind of like a strong one. And I think it's because if you ever go looking for funding, you get a lot of no's, predominantly no's.
And actually, you're lucky if you get a no. 'Cause a lot of times you
Yeah.
just get ghosted.
Yeah. You don't
You
get,
send like 20,000 emails and you whatever, like crickets.
yeah, you don't even get in the door. And,
If you get a no, you consider yourself lucky.
yeah. And Greg just like flew in the face of all that. He's talking to him. He manages to be excited about everything I'm also excited about, and still make good decisions. And that was one of the important things that I learned from him. Because when I first entered that world, it was my perspective that one had to shut down one's enthusiasm and get really to like just validation points, just the stark reality, and any kind of excitement would just skew your view. And that is like the opposite of him. He was just, I would get talking to him, and often he'd be like, "This is cool. This is genuinely cool. Um, what you're saying to me right now probably won't work, but if this were the case, it might. So keep thinking about it." And I realized like, oh no, it is exactly the enthusiasm that leads him to like yes and ideas. But he still makes good decisions. He's still very capable of saying like, no, we're not going to do that. Let's do something else. So I don't know. It was, Greg was part of the reason why I've had such a good time in the startup world, because I realized that like that was an option. Is
Because there are not many data scientists in the startup world, is it?
I think there's more now. I remember when I was 2016 or something when I first entered there, and one comment that I got was like, "Well, we don't know what to do with the data scientist. Are you an okay engineer?" And I went, "Well, I'm a passable engineer, but I have a lot of these other skills." Nowadays, there are more. There are definitely events that if you go to are going to be fairly full of people. I think on average, if you are talking about people who were data scientists before about 2019, it's a pretty thin field. There are definitely people who did their careers, and myself included, in this kind of work. And often we got dug out of the back of a lab someplace. But much like the boom that happened in CS learning in the early 2000s, There's been sort of a boom, I think positively, for people becoming data scientists sort of nowish. Like, people are now going to colleges, have been for a few years, going to colleges and saying, well, how do I become a data scientist? How do I become a machine learning engineer? I want to do these things and I want them to be the mainstay. So people have been making programs for it. Um, and certainly there's some crosstalk where engineers go one way or data scientists go the other. So the field isn't really blurring so much as more people are taking it as a similar track to engineering. So we're having kind of a bloom of folks that just came out as like machine learning, it came out of college or wherever they are, as machine learning engineers. And they're entering the field, and then there's a number of more people. This is funny that sort of just came out as prompt engineers because of the new bloom in generative AI. I think that's actually Um, it's positive because it drove interest. There is sort of a risk in implementation because it's not just prompting that's strictly necessary right now. You can do some amazing stuff with prompting, but generally, maybe if you can't prompt chains and agent thinking and RAG and these other things that bolt onto it. Um, if we're familiar with those, they're able to make some amazing things. Um, but I'm a little bit concerned that people that are sort of green in the other areas, but who really like, the GPT series of large language models, um, are probably going to have some learning curve about that other stuff. But that's normal. It's just that's an unusual thing because it was so easy to get into modern AI from a prompt engineering perspective. So much easier than it was to get into to like ML engineering from like a supervised ML and Python and SQL. You still had to do it like a fairly heavy lift. So people have there are a number of people who just got into the industry just this second, and I want to a welcome them and b say there's a whole world of stuff, and you're gonna like it all, but like it might be a bit of a lift. So like don't not learn that stuff because modern language models are so cool. Still learn that stuff. It's gonna play really well.
So back to mentoring. Are you mentoring anyone right now?
I don't think I am right now. I've had a number of students, often at the national lab, and occasionally like a summer intern or something in startup land. I actually don't think I am, and that might be an oversight. I don't know. I because of the AI bloom, I've spent so much of my time making sort of novel uses of language models for about 2 years. I kind of haven't been in that world. I may have to change that.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to find someone to mentor. That'd be
Mm.
a good thing for you to do. So when someone comes like a AI machine learning person, like how do they keep their skill? Is like they have to take classes, is like updated things, it's just a matter of going to YouTube University and keeping up with stuff. Like how do you like you people like you keep up to date and like keep your skills sharp, so to speak?
This is a really tough one. Because you could ask the same question of engineers, right? And that's what they'll probably say is like, well, I build things and I keep needing to build new things and there keep being new tech. So I kind of continually spend 10% of my time learning. Um, and I'm kind of like that too. I think if there is a difference, it's that some of the learning is scattered around really early sources. So like I read a lot of scientific papers that are coming out in like the AI space. And part of that is because I have ideas that I want to do, and then I check and find out that yes, someone just did it, and here's how it works. So do some of that, and because of that, there's aggregators. There's like a place called 2 Minute Papers online, which you may be familiar with. It's a YouTube channel that's someone that just sort of summarizes um, um, sort of some of the latest AI stuff, and that was a really good source where I would go there and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and then I'd go at least skim the paper. So some of my time's there. Um, Honestly, being embedded in it is being a little bit spoiled again because some of it's just necessary. So what I was saying about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is one of the systems that is sort of underlying the modern use of the language model. Um, And really, I feel like it's almost been a community effort to stand this idea up. There are people doing basic research on it, sort of showing what works and what doesn't. There are people doing implementation stuff on it from a library's perspective, and then there's people doing implementation stuff on it that I've been in that camp doing either home rolling like different RAG systems or trying to find the best ones for an application and use them. But the fact is that I guess to stay on the edge of the wave, what you do is understand the big ideas, and you have to basically go to research and Reddit and YouTube and everywhere else to kind of like understand what the big pieces are. So like RAG as a concept showed up, and I went, okay, this is what I've kind of been thinking too. I will hang on to this thing and watch it. And then ordinarily you'd have to go back and keep looking. But what really happens is I keep wanting to build things, and I know I need one of those. So I'll figure out like, oh, okay, RAG system goes here. And then when it comes time to build that, then I have this sort of, you know, I have this sort of, charter to go back and dig in a little harder and figure out what's new. So I keep filling in bits of like, you have to basically stay cognizant of the big ideas, and then you essentially fill in bits of knowledge by building something that uses them. And I've been pretty good about always needing to sort of go back and forth across that field. You need to stand yourself back up and spend some time learning. If you start falling back of the wave and you start hearing terms that you're not sure what they mean, and you're probably spending too much time just reading papers and thinking about it when like you're deep enough that you can see the new exact implementations come out, but that's not really your job. That's a painful thing to say. Like, normally my job is build things, build new products that are going to go the distance and help somebody. And so because of that, some of my time has to be staying on the wave. I have to stay on the front edge of the wave. Um, and so that's kind of what I do. If I say there's like I could pick any number of levels, and I say there's two levels. There's understanding what all the big concepts are right now, and there's understanding deeper into those concepts. Maybe there is a third one where you're literally doing academic research on them. You stay basically at level one for everything and make sure you don't fall back of that. And all of that is uh, a complete random net of talking to people talking to people at startups, talking to people at get-togethers, getting on YouTube, going to paperswithcode.com and like seeing what's new. Um, and I'd say, yeah, might be 5 to 10% of a week is kind of that.
Is it safe to say that the United States is like leading the world in AI technology and AI, everything involved with AI?
I'm actually way less certain about this. So,
And a follow up question: if we're number one, what country is like right behind our heels, like number two in all this?
so, so I'm gonna bring up China, which I think is the obvious. If we are basically sort of neck and neck with somebody, it's probably them. However, um, I know that they were sort of faster than us in implementation of machine vision back in the day. So back when it was whatever 2017 or something, they already had a bunch of systems over there that would, this is how you would go to a movie: is you would just put money into your app that everybody used. You say, I want to go to this movie at this time. You buy the tickets, and then you just walk in because it would see your face and understand that you were there to see that movie and open. And those doors like wouldn't open unless you had bought a ticket, and that was it. And at the time, the discussions sort of around the round table in startup land were like, yeah, we could never do that here. It's people would be freaked out. The idea that like your face is basically your fingerprint now, and you're walking around with it, and cameras are everywhere checking to see if you're the right person to be there. Like that's nuts. We don't really trust that, and I think for some good reason. But it also means that there's been a bunch of real implementation development that didn't have any pushback or didn't have much in that environment. So I don't know who's really winning there. It's possible that China is ahead of us in terms of some of the AI implementation space. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Let me ask you this: so back in the day, there's the space race between us and Russia, right?
Yeah.
Big to do, right? Now I think some people would say there's an AI race between us and China, right? Of course, a lot of people were like, no, we can't lose to China because they're like a communist government, dictator government, all the social media stuff they're doing, right? Social media scores, whatever. But like, does it really matter who wins the AI race? Like, isn't the AI tech out there for everyone, or does it really matter if we quote unquote win this or not?
Well, that's genuinely a good question. No, I'm struggling with an answer on this one. I'm actually kind of not sure whether or not it is a big deal. I mean, in some sense, we in China have sort of demonstrated the willingness to do parallel development. So in some sense, we know that there's like Chinese versions of ChatGPT and other open language models that are more, generally more specified to that language. And and we sort of have ones as well. I guess the question is there a nuclear bomb around the and you know what I mean by that, right? Is that so if we're just saying, hey, this is going to help everybody, don't worry about it. It's just, it's like nuclear power. It's going to be clean. It's great. Everybody should develop it. And, it's okay if they get it 5 years earlier than us. Maybe they'll share. It'd be fine. But if you say, actually, there's this bugbear coming where we all expect for there to be a thing that comes when you get good enough. And we really want to get good enough faster because that thing could be a weapon. They get it first. They could use it on us in some way that harms either the country or the our happiness in some way. I think honestly, now that I put it together, there is such a thing. Um, I used to refer to this as the mind bomb. Um, the So remember what I said earlier? You can give a deep fake to someone, tell them it's a deep fake, and they still sort of believe it. So in general, um, it is my understanding that it's been shown that like there are basically not farms, but like office blocks full of people in like Russia, where each of them is 40 people on Reddit, kind of like developing relationships and being there and putting stuff on. And the concept behind that is that if then some influence is desired, there's maybe, thousands and thousands of voices that they can all kind of make, say, a similar thing. They can basically wave a message through as though it were organic and say, ah, no, everyone's talking about this now. The new meme is this that says that. And the I and that's deeply concerning. And in some sense, my autistic scientist mind says it shouldn't be. Say whatever you want. What I don't have to believe it, but maybe I do have to believe it. The thing about deepfakes is true. Um, and if I do have to believe it a little bit, if say you have one synthetic personality, um, who says a thing in front of me that is different from what I believe, but only a little bit, so that I'm a little bit tractable to it, then you have 1/1000th of the way to convince me. And if you then do that 999 more times, I am convinced of that thing. Then you can synthesize my beliefs and consent. And that's a deeply problematic idea. Like, that's really scary. But even that required sort of cultural knowledge, the investiture in like a bunch of people. It was the classic before you fire, missiles at me, you have to like get your missile carrier close, and I could see you doing that, and it costs money, and I can see you spending the money and burning the gas to get your missile carrier close. You know, um, and we hoped that that was the case at least somewhat with sort of online influence like that. But if it isn't, if I can instead synthesize 100,000 people and with completely not touching any of these things, have those sort of infiltrate all the social media spaces and become people that folks like and agree with and talk to, and they're good enough that they never really drop the ball, or at least not so much that I compromise this whole thing. Um, then I can do that same thing that I said for almost no money. Not none, but like for almost no money, I could just say, oh yeah, no, I want community A to think thing X. And that is a machine that I can just turn on and it will make that happen. I That feels like disruptive to the point of disaster. And I used to call this idea the mind bomb because it felt a lot like that. Us deciding that there could be this terrible weapon because it was theoretically possible. And then because we knew it was theoretically possible, we sort of decided to do it before anyone else could do it. And I think that some of the concern about who wins the AI race is that we all sort of know that there's this hole human cognition that can be exploited, and no one really knows how to plug that hole. So we're all considering who's going to do the exploiting first. That is such a dark thing to say. Is I don't know, like
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that
back when the atomic bomb was first made, they all knew that was a
mm,
bad thing. But like, well, if we don't make it first, Hitler's going to make it, right? So we have to make it first.
yeah, and that may have been correct. I don't this feels like it's sort of above my pay grade thinking. I know how to make the thing, right? And I kind of don't want anybody to make the thing, but what happens now? Because if I know it and you know it, then the counterparts there also know it. So what happens?
Yeah. So back to deepfake real fast. I just remember this. So one time on the Joe Rogan podcast, they played somebody did a deepfake of him doing an ad for some company, right?
Yeah.
And Joe was like, you know what? I've never heard of this company. I know I did not do this ad. It sounds just like me. I know I
Mhm.
didn't do this ad. I have no idea who this is. But part of me is like, is that you? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like his own voice. Like, it's in sound just like him. Like, man, like, did I do this? I know
Yeah.
I didn't do this. I've never heard this company before. There's
Jeez.
nothing I would do an ad for. Like,
Mm,
he does his like a bullet trace whiskey, like
mm.
hot stuff,
Oh,
UFC. It was like something like off, like I think it was like candy bars, like then he would never do a candy bar ad, right? And like, man, I know this is not me, but man, part of my mind is like, man, is it you, Joe?
yeah, no, the power of that is again like what I believe at least once a certain level of reality is met, your brain tries to make it even more real
Yeah.
rather than pushing it away. And so there's this like you 100% know this is fake, but you still kind of don't believe it.
And the
So good, but
danger
it's
is
true.
like, I've heard that it only needs like hear your voice like 5 seconds, right? So what he does, your steals your voice and it calls your grandmother. Hey, Grandma Jones, I'm in
Mm,
jail. I need ten thousand
yeah.
dollars. Sit it here, right? Like I
Oh,
think there's a lot
so
of danger in that.
I remember seeing that one come on. I used to periodically do at PSL a roundup of the best voice synthesis. I did that a few times where I'd be like, here's the very best, here's the very edge of the market. And I remember it just going from like obvious robot to not so obvious robot to almost human. And then in the intervening time, it's gone to all the way human to a specific human. Um, it's amazing in some sense, but also, yeah, the fact that the immediate application space is so negative.
Mm, yeah. And then back to China. So I had a friend that lived there for 10 years. He was telling me, like, like he said, I understand with the United States, like kind of scared the social media score. But he said, from his point of view, it might be a good thing for China. Like he said, he broke it like this. In the United States, I mean, we have things wrong. We have like a certain standard of living, right? Like we
Mm.
know stuff's going to work, right? And also in the United States, like suppose you're walking and like you take your wallet out, you drop $20, right? Odds are someone's going to pick up and give it to you, right? Where he said in China, it's flip the coin if something's going to work, or like if you drop money, they're going to take it from you, right? So people like he said in the United States is like most chance like highest common denominator be a good person. Where China's like lowest denominator rules, right? So you say that the social media score is actually a good thing for China because it's gonna make people like be aware of what they do. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but when he said like that, kind of makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I'm not as familiar as I should be with Chinese culture and the sort of interactions there. I tended to know a few people who were from there or who were working there. Um, so that's new to me, but
The problem was like,
it's definitely
I know United States thing is bad, but it's actually he said like I don't agree with it. Of course, it's bad, but from the Chinese culture point of view, where he saw that one city lived in for 10 years, he was like, this actually might make sense.
that's an interesting thought at least. Yeah, I don't know. The concern is basically always that
You don't want
no
Big
matter
Brother
what
1984.
yeah, no matter what, it's like at this moment, if I were permitted to dig through every part of your life, everything that you did, everything that you even probably thought or believed, and I was allowed to essentially come up with a summary judgment of you, how sure are you that there is nothing in there
Yeah,
that
I
wouldn't be
mean,
considered super bad?
bias. There's probably a bias in there too.
Yeah, like I'm fairly certain, and I think this is coming from a non-neurotypical perspective, which is probably my level of concern for that. It's partially colored by that. And I got to admit it that it's my ability to navigate all the normal social interactions that people do is okay, and it's come up from marginal. Maybe someday it will be basically decent, but we're not quite there yet, and I do my best. But since I kind of live in that uncanny valley that a lot of people from the autism spectrum do, I have no faith at all that that's not going to also be sort of uh, coherent with the idea that I'm some kind of deviant and should be taken care of or should be censured. Um, I'd be surprised if I wasn't in such a system. And I don't know. It's whatever we bought for that, whatever positivity we bought, it would have to be pretty valuable for me to be okay with that.
Yeah, and I think most people in the United States do realize how often they're on cameras, right? Because walking down the street, you're on camera. You know, traffic stop cameras. You know, stores are cameras. Like, the only difference is like all those cameras, at least knock on wood or plastic. I hope that it's not
Yeah.
coordinated. Hopefully, no one's like controlling all these cameras and control like going from like a camera Macy's or camera like in the sidewalk. You know, hopefully there's no like mass person controlling all those cameras, like seeing everything, right? All I know it's kind of like scatterbrain, so to speak, right?
Yeah, no, in the United States, this has actually been very interesting to me. So we have, since we have, essentially a body of law and rights that at least are supposed to protect us in this way, there are a lot of those things where technically, if somebody thought you specifically did a thing, it is possible for them to synthesize such a system just for you. It's like if they care so much and they say, "Hey, Jason like stole a car and I can prove it," and the idea that then they could get the appropriate warrants, go through all the process of requisitioning video, put that video together in their lab, verify that yes, this was your trajectory through the mall and it looks like you stole this car, whatever. Um, but we all had, some hope that two things, A, the idea is that they won't do that unless they already have some prior belief, some credible belief that that happened, that they wouldn't just do it to everyone up front, and B, that they couldn't, and the couldn't just changed, right? So like, right now you're right. Like the Macy's cameras probably just go to Macy's. They probably have a couple of their own algorithms trying to figure out if someone's shoplifting or whatever they do. I don't know, but they're not all one. Yeah, they're not all one system, and the the opposite system in which all of these go to the government by design. Everyone's trajectory gets checked every day. They put that through like an anomaly detector to see if anyone's acting weird. They put the anomalies through like a detection system to figure out if they can find out what they're doing weird. And then they sort of have like a summary judgment that that person is weird and thus a problem is like super scary. And it's weird because technically all the tech's already there. We just hope that we have like rights and principles that stop us from doing that. And that is the people that have been more harsh on China certainly felt like that was not the case about them. And I don't feel like I can weigh in enough on that just because I don't have too much of that knowledge.
Remember back in the day when Amazon had a program where like they would like deliver packages into your house.
Mm. Yeah.
I like, I don't know. People like, are you serious? Do you think this is a good thing, right? And I guess that wasn't a good thing. They stopped doing it, of course, like, and of course they, go in the person's house, not there, or it's just all the moral stuff that could have came with that.
Yeah. And everyone, I don't know if that's just a cultural thing or a cultural difference, but yeah, I remember that. And
Like
for,
some
for a
random stranger
minute,
come to my house when I'm not there. Like, are you kidding me? Right?
yeah, and it's like,
Like what's gonna stop them like walking around, and doing whatever? I mean,
yeah, and everybody was just kind of not okay with it. Like, and technically, the benefit that you would get was obvious. It's like,
oh
well,
yeah,
sometimes people steal stuff
yeah.
from your
None
house,
of your stuff gets stolen.
um, and so and essentially that question was informally put before, the United States at least. Hey, would you pay? Would you pay random person
And
gets to be in your house and they just say they didn't do anything weird in exchange for you never lose a package again? And everybody said, no, I
yeah,
won't pay that. I
yeah.
don't think that's a good trade.
Like even if we had the person on camera, all the kind of stuff, they said no. Now my question is this: what if Amazon came back like 5 years from now and said, "Hey, we're gonna have robot delivery people coming to your house"?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah,
Not a human, like a robot coming to your house to deliver. Of course, things like they still have like cameras in their eyes. They just like film your house and stuff, but it's not a human.
oh, that's interesting. It's a question of the belief of the motivations of a human being very varied versus the idea of the motivations of a robot being very simple versus the belief that nothing has been sort of done to these robots
Yeah,
to
yeah. Amazon
collect
has
that.
or Microsoft has coded them like to like do a quick stand up apartment. Oh, Jason doesn't have any, flowers in his house. Let's sell them flowers or something like that, you know?
Yeah, and I'm positive they would try and do that. Like that just feels like a
Very Amazonian thing to do.
yeah. I've been in some weird rooms where things like that were discussed. Like, could we do this? Actually, I remember one. This is something that flopped, and it was for a very similar reason. This was, and I heard now they have systems that are trying to do this, but I basically said, hey, there are a bunch of, especially, older people who want a little bit of help and a little bit of oversight, but they don't necessarily want to leave their house, or like they're still living okay, but they want something to just check in on them.
Mhm.
I said, well, look, if you let me put an optical camera and a cheap thermal camera together in a housing, and you let me put three of those around your house, I can tell you if you fell down and are now unconscious, if you've had a heart attack, because there were a bunch of interesting blood related technologies that if you have a fever, if you were starting to get sick in another way, there's a bunch of things that I could basically tell, and so you could hand to someone you trust a kind of dashboard that says says your conditions, or you could put tripwires on there where, like, if I fall down, go ahead and call the paramedics, or don't call the paramedics, but call like my emergency contact, whatever. And I said, hey, there's a suite of things that I think people are going to want, and everybody went over it and basically went, yeah, but no one's going to allow a company to put cameras in their house and then just say, trust us, we're not going to do anything with that information that doesn't, that you don't know about. No one will believe that. I think that's actually changing slowly. Anyway, it was sad to me at the time because I went, no, I mean, we could put all the stuff on board and we could prove that no data was coming off of it. And yeah, but that's esoteric. What are you gonna prove to, like, people that don't spend all their time thinking about software and, edge computing, that you've done this? Why would they believe you? Anything that you say is just going to sound like jargon, and they won't. So we didn't do it. But I have heard that those are now sort of in the works, and so maybe perspective has changed.
You think that's changed because now more people are living by themselves? Like back in the day, people lived like with a wife for a long time, like families close by. But now more people live by themselves, families are spread all over the place.
It,
And
it
and so now they need like tech to like take care of them, so to speak.
it's yeah, it's either more that the need is more intense, so people are willing to do it, um, or that we have been sort of primed by the at-home devices where there's sort of already a thing in your house, and you had to believe, as I believe is true, that, like, they have a wake word, and before you say that wake word, they're technically just dumping a buffer, which is true because they don't have the space to store all the stuff, and you can go and check and, like, net stat everything and, like, figure out that things aren't being, like, exfiltrated from it. So it's like, if I were to believe it, I were to believe that we have really good nerds and hackers. So, like, if you sold this to me, you'd be like, look, we open source the design, and people can. I don't care if you pull one apart and take it down to pieces. Go ahead and do that. And I'm like, I know that somewhere in the U.S. someone will be doing that. And if you're if you're cheating me, we will know, because someone's willing to actually pull that down to parts and figure out what every IC does and what every data stream does. And so I'd believe it based on that, but that's sort of, again, esoteric knowledge. So I don't know if maybe people are just okay with it because we've slowly gotten.
So, and this again might be something you can't talk about or don't want to talk about, but
Mm,
you just found a new role.
mm.
Can you talk about where you be doing this new role?
Um, Maybe I want to keep that slightly under wraps for the moment.
Okay.
I'm gonna be working with a venture studio. I'll
Okay.
say that, and I love these people and they're fantastic. So the role is going to be, I think, a little bit of a trial for both of us. And that's one of the interesting things about the venture world, is that there tend to be a lot of ways to work together. That was always true of, like, venture studios, startup studios, incubators, that kind of thing. Um, a lot of times people will ask, well, how do companies start? And the answer has always been every way that you think. So sometimes people inside the studio come up with something and they think it's cool, and they start to try and find a CEO that wants to run it. Sometimes a CEO will come in and say, hey, I have this really cool idea, but I need your tech help. Or I'm techie, but I need your marketing help, or whatever. And you sort of incubate with them. Um, Sometimes somebody comes in with an idea that already works, and it's like, a product, and you say, well, I want to scale now. It's only in one market and it's not that big. Not too many people know about it. I need intense marketing help and a purse string to, like, pay all my marketing budget so that I can expand to the whole US really fast and win the go-to-market war. Every one of those was like on the table, and so I think the new role that I have is probably going to facilitate quite a bit of that kind of thing where, um, yeah, where we're thinking about every which different way to kind of come up with both ideas and start companies. So for the moment, though, we're still a little bit in the works, so I kind of don't want
Okay, no
to push
worries.
on that too much.
And we're safe. Be safe to say that for the most part, you're pretty positive about the future of AI and how it's going to positively affect the world.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, basically, it's going to socially get a little bit of a black eye this year because you know people are going to say, "Oh, we tried a bunch of things and it didn't work," and it'll be easy to say, "Well, that means this tech isn't ready yet." I don't think that'll be true. I think some real winners will come out of the companies that just got funded, but there'll be some blood in the water as people fall off and so forth. Um, but in the long run, yeah, I think so. This has the potential to do the thing that we all wanted, which is drive most systems to autonomy and drive the real human cost of like goods and services to basically zero. And my only hope is that we find a way to then share that prosperity because it'll be basically infinite prosperity if we do this right. And I'm very hopeful about that. We'll, yeah, I'll do everything I can to make that world.
Is there any like AI company or AI tools out there that you believe is going to like really make the world a better place that most people don't are not aware of yet?
Oh, let's see. So everybody sort of knows ChatGPT. There are more of those. I mean, there's Bard from Google, and when I say the name, it'll come to me. There's a number of these. There are also ones that are in the public domain. So those you can't actually have the model itself and run it yourself. You have to basically talk to the API or the web interface of a big company that, you know. So there was one that I think Meta came out with called Llama. Now there's a Llama 2. As I understand, it was sort of leaked originally, and then Meta kind of said, "Okay, fine, keep working with it." And people have made a lot of like fine tunings and derivative models. And there's some that are really good that'll basically fit on a home GPU. So the interface of that is going to be cool because as tech continues to get better, if we're still even roughly following Moore's law at all, it means that in a year or two, the idea of one of those that's really just yours and lives on your own devices is plausible. And tech, would I say, enabling tech that people don't know about? Um, yeah, no, I have to think about that one.
Okay. So Sean, is anything else that I asked you that it didn't, or anything else you want to talk about?
Uh, no, I think we hit sort of all the points that I really wanted to chat about. Just thanks for having me on. It's been
Yeah,
great.
yeah. And can you give us your social media in case anybody wants to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to, although I'm basically on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook and I'm
Okay.
not I'm not as like I don't have a YouTube channel.
Okay.
So you can have those and I'm happy to pass those around. Although I'm Sean Robinson, I think I'm Sean-Robinson-PhD at LinkedIn. And feel free to find me on Facebook if you want. Same name. And I'm told I look fairly distinctive, so there's that. Um but yeah, I may after this I may have to change that because there's a number of socials that I kind of don't contribute to that much. But I write articles on LinkedIn, so if you want to go check that out, I periodically will make one of those, and they tend to be about the current state or the future state of AI stuff.
Yes. And can you give us any last minute wisdom or advice on anything you want to talk about?
So I think if anything, it's just we have a really good shot here. I mean, I've been trying to basically my whole career has been about this, like trying to take that shot at figuring out what I have that could make it so that we get beyond scarcity. This is such a big dream. And like, this is one of the first times we really had a shot at it. So if we all work hard, we probably will get there. And if you're the sort of person who's good at talking and you can try and convince people that this is going to be good and we're going to get the good side of this future, then please do it. Because what I know is that we will get to that future. And I really want it to be the good side. So that's it. Please keep working towards that. And thank you.
Sean, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, thanks for having me on.
To our listeners, thank you for your time as well. Remember to be great every day.